We're recording.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Raymond Kane
Morning,
here.
Ray.
I would like to convene the August Marine Fish Advisory Commission meeting. And we'll start with introductions and announcements. We need to review and approve the August 20th, 2020 business meeting agenda. Do I hear a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second from Tim Brady.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, moving along. Review and approval of the May 21st, 2020 and the June 18th, 2020 draft business meeting minutes. Need a motion to approve?
Motion to approve, Suki.
Seconded by,
Bill?
thank you. All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Ray, Mike has his hand up.
Michael, you're recognized.
And so I do have a minor change to the June meeting minutes on page 10. I would just like to revise it. It says Mike P. asked if the mitigation fund included the for-hire fleet. To add to that would be and recreational anglers. Then as it continues to the next sentence, Mike P. pressed DMF to have the for-hire fleet, so include recreational anglers included as their businesses may be negatively impacted by turbine farm sighting. I forwarded Jared the revisions to hopefully make it easier, and that's what I would propose to revise. Thank you.
Mike, I've received that language from you in an email this morning.
Thank you.
So, Jared, now changes have to be made. How do we go about this?
I'd approve the May separately and then go to approve the draft June minutes. So look for a motion for just the May.
Okay,
Yeah, Suki.
Suki made the motion. Do I hear a second for the May 21st?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
And then what, the June 18th draft business meeting minutes will come back to us in the September meeting? Jared?
No, you could just ask to approve for a motion to approve the minutes as amended by Mike Pearnock.
Okay. Move to approve the motion on the June 18th draft business meeting with the addition of what Michael had to say.
I'd make a motion, Tim Brady, to approve the minutes with the revision by Mike P.
Second. Suki.
And all those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Moving along to comments. Welcome, everybody. Hopefully you've all had a healthy, safe summer. Your families are healthy. And I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Ron Amidon.
Good morning, Chairman King. Good morning to the commissioners as well as the DMF staff. We have had a very busy summer, to say the least. Most recently, since I last spoke with you folks, one of the items that's kind of taken up a substantial amount of our time has been fishing and boating access. As you all know, Commissioner Pearnock, as well as 5 others on a committee with me, worked very hard to get our fishing and boating access points opened up and remain open. Recently, there has been a rash of boating instances that has caused a lot of anxiety amongst the public, such as rafting in particular. The epicenter of that seems to be Gloucester. In the town of Gloucester, we have 5 fishing and boating access ramps and piers that we operate. And there was rumblings from the city of Gloucester that they were asking the governor to consider closing those ramps. We fought back very, very hard on that. We've been able to keep them open. Instead, we have changed the perspective of attacking that with a task force type of a development. So Director Doug McKinnon from Fishing and Boating Access has teamed up with MEP, the Harbor Master, State Police, Coast Guard, as well as the local PD to try to reinforce what's going on up there. From our surveillance, we have found that there's been a substantial amount of illegal use of our parking lots. And the largest problem seems to be local residents having overnight guest parking using our parking lots, so that the folks trying to use it for boating and fishing can't even get into it. There's been a fair amount of sunbathers, swimmers, picnickers, and dog walkers. So we've developed some additional signage, if there isn't enough there already, to advise these people that it is for strictly fishing and boating access, period. And there is a substantial enforcement group going to be in place there this weekend. Last weekend, it'll be even bigger this weekend. And we will begin to educate and enforce the use of those ramps appropriately. This task force approach is something that we're going to deploy up and down the entire coast at all of our facilities to try to educate the public on where the money comes from to develop these facilities and what the proper usages are. Next item we have is we're currently working closely with both the MWRA and DMF's Ross Kessler on the Deer Island Pier event that we hope to have a grand opening out there sometime around the end of September, the beginning of October. As soon as we have a confirmed date, I will let you folks know. We would absolutely love to have each and every one of you there. I also want to congratulate DMF on their rollout of the CARES Act. It really, truly has been a national leading model that has been mimicked by others. Great amount of fanfare on that. Also, I have heard quite a bit of good comments regarding the Cape Cod Canal's restrictions on commercial striped bass fishing. So kudos to the team for getting it right. And also the latest thing obviously is to extend the fishing season on many of our most popular species. DMF seems to be firing on all cylinders. A lot of good comments, a lot of compliments. So thank you everybody for doing a great job. And that concludes my comments, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner. I would like to thank you and the task force. I didn't know that was on your plate, you know, about the parking situation with for access for recreational and boats. I never realized or knew about that, and I would like to thank you and the task force for taking the bull by the horns on that.
No problem, our pleasure.
Thank you. Any questions for the commissioner?
I'm not seeing any hands raised, Ray.
Director McKiernan, you're up.
Thank you, Ray. I'm going to be very brief because so much of what I've been involved with over the last month is captured in the agenda. CARES relief, seafood availability issues, right whale litigation, some HR issues as I try to configure the upper parts of the agency since I've been elevated and David's departed. We're working on all of that. The one thing I'd like to bring up at next month's meeting is some of our shellfish challenges with FDA. It's an ongoing issue that I've been involved with assisting Jeff Kennedy, who's our new program leader in shellfish, and it has to do with FDA's trying to force our hand on reclassification of certain shellfish growing areas relative to mooring, marinas, and outfalls. So those are the things that I've been involved with. One last item. There was a letter signed by the governor that just came out, I think yesterday or the day before, asking the Secretary of Commerce to declare the sea herring fishery a disaster declaration. This follows on Maine's request that came out about a month ago, but ours was similar but a little different. Maine's was strictly the Area 1 fishery, but ours was the herring fishery in its entirety, because many of the boats that are in our fleet fish in all the herring areas. Ray, as you know, we have these attempts at weekly calls to assess the sea herring landings to determine if we need to dial back on the rules regarding daily limits and weekly limits. And each week the meeting's canceled because the landings are really below expectations, and we're nowhere near reaching the quota. At least we weren't previous to this week. So I think that's an obvious sign of the status of the stock. So I'll stop there. I'll take any questions, but on most of the issues we're going to be dealing with that I mentioned, we have an agenda item covering those.
Thank you, Dan. Questions for Director McKiernan?
I'm not seeing any hands raised, Ray.
Thank you, Jared. Moving on to law enforcement, I presume Lieutenant Bass is going to cover this.
Yes, sir. Good morning, all. Again, also trying to be brief. Over the last couple of months, obviously, it's a busy time of year. We did have a couple of arrests on the canal related to overages, undersize, and commercial violations. Also, recently, a pretty significant Vibrio case down here on the South Shore. And I guess as the Commissioner mentioned, we have a large effort still involved with the COVID safety efforts. Still continuing with DCR, but then as he mentioned, a large effort for the boating safety aspect of it. And again, I might be up on the Annisquam and the Gloucester area myself this weekend and whatnot, but that is taking a lot of time. And also statewide, there has been an increase, it appears, for people getting out on the water. So a number of boating accidents and water incidents statewide. As far as where we stand with our new hires, we did graduate the 3 from the academy, and they currently in our training program, hopefully soon to be in the field training aspect. And we are in the very, very early process of trying to hire 7 more officers. And I have nothing further.
Thank you, Lieutenant Bass. Any questions for Lieutenant Bass?
Mike Pearnock has his hand raised.
Michael, you're recognized.
Thank you, Lieutenant Bass. Just a quick question. If somebody who's shoreside, recreational, or commercial is found poaching, doing an illegal act, do you have the ability to confiscate their gear as well as a vehicle they may have associated with getting there? Or is it one or the other, or both?
Well, yes, there's a tremendous amount of officer discretion that can be invoked. To simply seize a vehicle just because they used it for transportation to get there is, you probably wouldn't win that one. But typically in the past, the vehicles I've seized, they're actively secreting fish or contraband or whatnot in there, so they're actively using it in the violation. But again, yes, so that we can carry a big stick in that aspect, but it is tremendously time consuming and also somewhat expensive to do so. So it's usually only for the worst case scenarios.
Thank you. That's good to hear that based on the magnitude of the incident, you have the ability to do that. I just wasn't sure. I've understood that that's being done in other states, so I'm glad to hear we have the ability.
Yep.
Thank you.
Fruits and instruments of the crime. Yep.
Thank you.
Ray Suki has his hand up.
You're recognized, Suki.
Yeah, good morning, Matt.
Morning.
I'm sure you are aware of the situation down in the Sandwich area, Lower Cape Cod Bay. With a particular guy, fishing multiple violations of lobster regulations. seems like everybody down there is quite upset by this one particular fellow who's known to you guys. I just hope that you're gonna make some kind of an effort to deal with this issue because I think we're getting close to some vigilante justice down there, and I don't want to really see that, but there's a lot of frustration down there about lack of MEP's response to what all these guys are complaining about down there. I just hope, I mean, I know it's hard for you guys to do stuff on the water, but something needs to be done.
Yeah, well, let's say, maybe I can talk to you after, but let's say there's two sides to every story. And there's been quite an effort already in progress criminally and whatnot. So if you want, I can give you a shout after the meeting and maybe give you the other side of the story.
Okay, Matt, appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Captain Kevin Clayton has his hand up.
Good morning, everyone. I just want to add to Lieutenant Bass' comments regarding the seizure of properties. A huge portion of that, not just that it takes up some time, is that storage is an essential part of that piece, and not having what I think we would all consider adequate ability to capture and hold any sorts of large property in a way that would be appropriate to at some point maybe return to the alleged perpetrator is a huge part of that. So I just want to make sure everybody's aware of that as well. And if any members have any significant issues, please do have folks use our radio room to get a hold of us so we can be aware and capture what all those complaints may be. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions, the captain? Okay. No questions, Jared?
No questions, Ray.
Okay, moving along, update on performance of the 2020 Quota Monitor Fisheries. And I presume Story might roll with this.
Yes, I'm going to take that and I'm going to share my screen here.
Morning, Story.
Good morning. Jared, should I be able to do that?
You should be able to do that, but if I need to change your status, I can make you temporarily the host if that's not an option. So just,
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, that's good, Jared. Thanks.
Story, it might be useful for some of your slides to reappear during the next agenda item on in-season adjustments.
Yes. So you
We'll
should
make that work behind the scenes, Dan.
Yep. Okay, so can you see the SCUP quota monitoring report now?
Yes.
Very good. Okay, so these are, you've seen these before. These are our weekly quota monitoring reports that we run internally, and you see a light blue line that's extending out. That's a projection based on the most recent week's landings, and so it can be pretty helpful seeing where we're headed. Doesn't always tell the whole story because we can't predict what's going to happen in the future. But what you're going to see here today are the reports that were run yesterday by our stats project, and they are all telling a story of fisheries that for the most part are all slightly down in overall landings and catch rates this year for a variety of reasons. And some of those are in the memos on fluke, sea bass, and striped bass, and you'll discuss those next. So here's SCUP, and this is down slightly from previous years. And then we can move on. If you have any questions as we go, let me know. Here's Fluke. What you see here is the winter fishery through April that did take close to 25%, which is the target for the winter fishery is 30%. So it took most of that. And then Beginning June 9th or 10th, you see the summer fishery take off. These catch rates, as described in the memo, are lower than previous years. We have about 54% landed so far. The next is horseshoe crab. You'll remember last year, for the first time maybe ever, we did hit 100% of the quota and shut the fishery down. And this year we are at about 70%. And we have accounted for all landings. We think we've really checked with the dealers on this to make sure we've got this right. And you can see that the catch rates just aren't the same in the summer fishery, in the summer period of July and August as previous years. And some of that can be directly linked to the reduced participation in the inshore fluke fishery. Sea bass, with the increased quota this year, the quota went up to 728,000 pounds. So that's part of the story here, and the fact that only 35% of that quota has been landed. Catch rates have been down a bit. I believe we're 30,000 pounds off from where we were at this time last year. That's in the memo on sea bass. But you can see that it's been tracking pretty consistently, if not dropped off just a little bit, end of July into August. Striped bass, the catch rates have been very down this year, especially on Cape Cod. We've seen a lot of a higher proportion of the landings than usual coming from the North Shore. But you can see that only about 34% of the quota has been landed. There were some bigger days you can see in the higher steps early on in the fishery, and those were primarily driven by North Shore landings. Bluefish, this is an interesting one, and the chairman asked us to look into this a little bit more. So you can see that the landings rate has really taken off and gotten steeper there in August very recently. And we've been asked to look at whether that's kind of a later spike in the landings than some other times over the past 5 years. And that does bear out. Looking back in 2015 and 2016, we did see that catch rate increase earlier, say by the end of June, and then track pretty consistently. So the idea that these bluefish are available commercially later in the season, there does seem to be some merit to that. We've heard that from the fleet. So that did bear out, this later spike in landings over the past few years as compared to 5 years ago or so. Menhaden, we did receive a couple quota transfers on Menhaden that allowed us to extend the fishery. We got to 100% over a week ago, I guess a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, and closed the limited entry fishery, which brought the trip limit down to 6,000 pounds for everyone. There's still a considerable amount of pogies in our waters we're seeing and hearing. And the next slide is going to bring us into the episodic events set aside, and Nicola is going to talk about that and how we were able to opt into that this year. So I'll move on to that, and we're keeping track of the landings daily. We just opted in this week, and I'll hand it over to Nicola to talk about that.
Thanks, Story. Good morning, everyone. So as Story said, we had 1.5 million in quota transfers during the months of July to help prolong the quota managed fishery. And then we closed that on August 7th. We weren't able to get another transfer, quickly enough for that to just keep the fishery going. So we instead looked to the episodic event set aside. particularly after Maine had used some of it, most of it, earlier in the year and gotten a better handle of what their landings were. So we knew how much of it was left. So there's about 400, as of Monday, before we started fishing on it, there was about 425,000 pounds left of the 4.7 million pound set aside, which is 1% of the overall coastwide quota. So we opted into that. It took a couple of days to get approval from the ASMFC because they have to look at the regulations to make sure that we have everything in place. And this is our first year going into it. So the plan review team takes a look at that. And one extra thing that we did was limit the landings to the trip limit to 25,000 pounds. Although under our regulations, which we adopted earlier this year, would technically allow a 120,000 pound quota, but given the smaller amount of the set aside that was left, we went with that 25,000 pound trip limit, which is consistent with how we manage the last 15% of the state specific quota. So what this means now that we're in the set aside is that the quota monitoring graph that Story showed will not change as these landings come in. They count just to the set aside and we send them directly to ASMC every day. And after the first 3 days of the participation, you can see we're at 195,000 pounds. So at the current rates, it's probably going to be very early next week that we, weather provided, that we use up the set aside and then we would close that fishery. At the same time as these landings are coming in, the smaller scale harvesters that don't have a Menhaden permit are now fishing under the 6,000 pound incidental catch limit. And those landings also don't go toward our quota, but they get tallied up at the end of the year and sent to ASMFC to be included in the, the total landings along the coast and included in the assessments. So after the set aside is used up, a couple states I'm aware will potentially have some quota potentially available for transfers. So after this is used up, we'll see what's going on in our local waters, see if the abundance is still, high enough to warrant any additional transfers. And seek those out if we think it's suitable to continue the fishery. If not, then all the harvesters will be at that 6,000 pound incidental limit at that point.
Questions for Nicola?
Mike Piernock has his hand raised.
Michael, you're recognized.
Thank you, Nicola. Just a quick question. If I understand this right, the set aside is 425,000 pounds that we can use, and we're at 194 through August 19th. Is that correct?
That's correct. And just those 3 days that we've been we've been opted into the program. So the set aside itself started at, closer to 5 million pounds, but Maine participated in it earlier this year. They closed their fishery down to just that 6,000 pound incidental limit. So they're no longer harvesting from it. So it's just the Massachusetts fishery that's currently taking from the remaining amount.
I'm curious, since there seems to be issues with having any commercial related fish having a market because of COVID. What is the market for Menhaden? Who's buying it? Because they seem to be landing it, and there must be a market associated with it.
Right. Well, Suki can probably speak to this as well, but it's used as lobster bait, and particularly with the stock status of herring and very low landings coming in for herring, there's been increased interest in the Menhaden fishery.
Yeah.
To supply those bait needs.
If I can add to that, Nicola, not only is it used by the lobstermen, but it's used by the crab fisheries. It's used on the entire East Coast as bait. So it's not only the lobster industry. I know plenty of striper fishermen and bluefin tuna fishermen that are using Menhaden. It's a forage fish, and it's thank God for the hard work and diligence of the DMF staff and ASMFC. We got lucky with the numbers that we are allocating for years coastwide, but it's a resource that's needed by the entire East Coast. And Suki, if you want to address this, go right ahead.
Yeah, I actually lugged pogies for Bobby Hanna this summer. I carried 25,000 pretty much every day from July, around the 4th of July till it ended. And we only left Gloucester Harbor once. It's plenty of demand. I mean, we were just going to the freezer every day for Cape Seafoods and unloading. And now there's probably more demand than there was back in the beginning of July. But like I said, the quota's caught. It doesn't seem any pogies. We went out the last couple of days and we didn't really do anything. So there's nothing around the Gloucester area right at the moment.
One last question, if I can have the floor.
By all means.
Thank you. Since Massachusetts is using the set aside, are any other states using the set aside?
Not currently. Maine did earlier. So we're just using up the remaining fraction of it after Maine used up most of it.
So I appreciate the fact, and I'm happy that our commercial fishermen and recreational and so on in Massachusetts are using it for their purposes. But if the whole East Coast is, I'm just a little concerned that we're having a localized depletion condition as a result of post-commercial fishing pressure. If the stock is such that you're going to remove 425,000 pounds, and what that then would do to us. I just throw that out there because I can't say one way or another whether it does, but logic would dictate to me that if you have these large vessels go in and remove that biomass, then the fish that we rely on to feed on it are going to disappear for a few weeks till things stabilize. I'd just like to know what your response would be to that.
I think it's important to remember that the set aside is part of the coastwide quota, and that quota has been set conservatively over the last number of years while we've waited for the ecological reference points to be adopted. Keeping the trip limit at 25,000 pounds did take into consideration, forage needs and, not removing the biomass too quickly.
Nicola, could I also add that, Mike, when you mentioned the scale of the boats that are participating in the fishery, when Suki described Bobby Hanna's operation, I believe Bobby Hanna's boat is smaller than Suki's. So Suki, what's your lobster boat is like maybe 42 feet as a carrier, and the seine boat is basically just coming up alongside. So these are small boat operations who are taking these 25,000 pound trips.
Are we good? Michael?
Yeah, thank
Suki
you.
has a,
Good, thank you.
Anybody else want to comment on this?
Suki has his hand up.
Suki?
Yeah, I think
Recognized.
the pogies left our area because of that storm a week and a half ago. The morning of that storm, the harbor was as full as I probably saw it all summer. And the next morning they were gone. And I'm not sure where they went to, but whatever the pogies are doing right now is weather related. It's certainly nothing to do with the fisheries. Because literally there was millions of pounds of pogies in Gloucester Harbor that morning of the storm. The next morning there was hardly anything left. The water temperature went down about 8 or 9 degrees overnight, and they were gone. Not sure where they ended up at, but they're not around here. But it was all weather related, nothing to do with the fisheries. Thanks.
Thank you, Suki. Well, any other
Captain
questions?
Clayton has his hand raised.
You're recognized.
Good morning again. I was just thinking and wondering if this downturn in access to these particular fisheries because of the virus, is there any general benefit to the fisheries from that, and down the road that we could project? Because I would imagine this is happening nationwide or worldwide, but is this necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, or just an incident? Thank you.
So does
Well,
any,
I'll take a crack at that, Ray. So Kevin, I think the jury's out on what harvest levels are going to look like by the end of the year. While the ex-vessel price for some species, it may be off. The species that we're just going to be talking about next, that we want to amend the trip limits and fishing days for, part of the reason for that is that we've experienced an increase in quota this year, especially for summer flounder and black sea bass. As far as other species, especially those that are taken by the recreational and commercial sectors, many on the East Coast believe that recreational fishing activity may be up this year. It remains to be seen once we get the catch estimates in, and those estimates may be subject to a little bit more variability or less precision because of the challenges of getting up close interviews with anglers with COVID. So I think that's a good question for next year. You know, when the tallies come in for all of these species, you know, we know there's been a reduced ex-vessel price on a lot of seafood, but that also means it may be more affordable. And in the current economic situation, that may be a kind of a blessing as well, that people with less income might be able to use this as protein.
Thank you. I would anecdotally state also that seems like people are very excited and pleased to be able to access their local fishing day boats to purchase fresh fish. So thank you.
I'm not seeing any further questions.
So then we're going to move along on the agenda, please.
One moment, Ray.
Well, I could start, Ray. I have the agenda in front of me. What's next on the agenda is in-season adjustments to commercial fishing limits for quota managed species. And if it's okay, I'll just begin with maybe my thoughts on this. The commission has received a lot of documentation on the three votes that we're asking you to take today. So as you know, back on August 10th, you know, among the staff, we looked at the catch rates, and we talked to many of the fishing participants, obviously not all, came up with what we thought were rational amendments, good amendments for the participants and for the markets. And we made proposals. And so under the regulations that we have that have been enacted over the last decade, it requires us to bring in-season adjustments to you folks for your approval, and the public in a 14-day comment period gets to weigh in on whether they think this is a good idea or a bad idea. And you know, it strikes me when I read a lot of the comments, you know, how much things have changed over my career. You know, back in the day when I started, there were no quotas for scup, sea bass, fluke. There was a quota for striped bass when it was quite small. It was only like 162,000 pounds at the lowest point in the late 80s. But over time, you know, we have worked, you know, diligently with the industry and using data to accomplish what I would describe as a fisheries management system that maintains an even flow of fish, that brings in, I wouldn't say maximum value, but tries to prevent market gluts so that the fish bring you know, a good, you know, strong value, you know, to the participants. Sometimes the fillet prices can be a little out of reach of most consumers because of our good work, but we certainly try to maximize the revenues if we can for the participants, that is the fishermen and the dealers. But now with these quota managed species, especially those managed by the ASMFC and Mid-Atlantic Council, we are into this annual routine where we, before at the beginning of the year, as we turn the calendar, we think through what happened in last year's fishery, trying to determine if we need new rules to make it better, or to fully utilize the quota, or to avoid an early closure, or to maximize value. So a lot of the rules that we have evolved. They've been layered over time, and so that's the new game. We try to make those in-season adjustments, try to listen to the fleet, try to listen to the dealers. And I think for the most part, we get pretty high marks from our stakeholders because we try to listen and we try to be responsive to emerging issues. So today or this morning, we're going to talk about striped bass, black sea bass, and summer flounder. And the black sea bass and summer flounder are probably a lot less controversial than the striped bass, owing mostly just to the emotional status of striped bass management, but it's always been that way, and it always will be. And so I guess we can get into the striped bass issue first. But before I do, I just want to remind the commission that when you voted on April 1st on the rules for this year, we were pretty clear, and I'm looking at the memo from April 1st, or from the meeting that was sent to you and deliberated on April 1st, and we talked about regarding open commercial fishing days. It said, if in-season adjustments are necessary to better utilize the quota, then we will likely consider adding a third or fourth open fishing day later in the season. This will allow DMF to further investigate the benefit of having consecutive fishing days throughout the week to better accommodate night fishing. So we saw this coming, but if you read the comments, in the record, there's a lot of opposition to us relaxing these rules on the striped bass commercial fleet. And so that is the I won't say that's a risk we take, but that's what we're up against. It's the optics of this are never going to be good for those who seek game fish, or those who feel that the striped bass stock is in very poor condition, which we would refute. So to today's recommendation, I'm recommending we go to 4 days a week effective September 1st, and just keep it that way right through the end. And there was a recommendation to go to 7 days a week by October 1, but I'm going to back off of that. And the memo itself does a good job of describing the catch rates. It describes, it tries to refute some of the concerns on the part of the game fish advocates. And it also, on the third page, second paragraph, it really talks about the layers of regulation that this fishery is subjected to. And I had a hand in almost all of it, except of course the legislation to go and hook and line. When you look back on all of these rules and the cumulative effect of them, it's no wonder the quota can't be taken. And a lot of the rules that we wrote were to address, back in the day, were to address excessive catches. We were taking up to 250,000 pounds a week back in the day. And one of the challenges for us in that scenario is to accurately monitor the catch, because when you have a 250,000 pound fishery with a 1 million pound quota, then obviously 250,000 pound a week, you obviously have a 4-week fishery. But for our quota monitoring folks, it gets really tricky because that last week could be low as like, let's say, it could be off by 50 or 60% compared to the previous week based on weather or whatever, or it could be even higher. And that's how we had a lot of unfortunate overages because the catch rates were so high. And so one of the things we did was we reduced the number of fishing days and extended the season, and that gave our quota monitoring team a much better opportunity to get a handle on the landings and to prevented overages. But I just want to, Jared now has this paragraph up on the screen. When you look at all of the things that we're constraining this fishery with, the permit renewal deadline, first of all, the hook and line only, but that's not going to change because that's in the statute. But you've got limited number of days per week, limited or reduced daily trip limits. We prevented charter operators from selling fish that they catch on charters. We did the fin clipping. We closed the commercial fishery around the summer holidays. We upped the size limit this year. We closed the canal this year. All of these were good ideas addressing some problem. But in its totality, we have really constrained this fishery. And of course, you know, what is this fishery? It's unlike sea bass, where you've got a sea bass rod and reel boat looks way different than a sea bass potter or a dragger that may be taking some sea bass. So striped bass is more challenging because it's all the same fleet. So however way this vote goes today, I would like to have the commission set up a subcommittee and sort of ponder these issues and deliberate on these questions about, you know, whether we want to make some radical changes to the commercial fishing regulations, or whether we want to sort of reconsider some of these, because I just think that it's at this point it's almost over-regulated. But at the same time, we have an excessive number of participants, and I'd be interested to see if the commission has the stomach for us to reduce the participation, or for that matter, require tagging by the harvesters, which we're doing this year for the first time in Tautog. So, so that's my pitch on striped bass. I hope you've had a chance to read the memo. It's really one of the better ones that we put together. You know, Jared, Mike Armstrong, Nicola all contributed to this to help me with this memo. And what I'd recommend, Ray, is before we take a vote on my motion, is maybe the commission members individually kind of weigh in, because as you know, with our interpretation of Section 17A, the commission needs to approve the director's recommendation for rule changes. And if I hear from the majority of the commission members in the next few minutes that our recommendation doesn't have a shot, I can make another recommendation, or we can talk about it without making motions. And then what I'll do is I'll come back with a motion that I think will pass. So I'd like to hear the commission members take on this, especially in light of this of all the things that we put into the memo.
That being said, Director, Jared, you'll tell me as you see raised hands, and I will recognize the individuals for conversation. And we're talking just about striped bass with this solution.
My hand is up, Khalil Bogdan.
You're recognized, Khalil.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate it. I've got some concerns. Number one, I want to go back and say, I thought the memo that Dan McKiernan, Director McKiernan, and the team wrote was very informative. I thought it was thoughtful, logical, but I do have some concerns. That as a charter captain who was strictly recreational and might, operating out of Essex County and out of the Essex River and Ipswich Bay and Crane Beach and Plum Island Sound, I saw striped bass as a means of running a business, and I did it for 20 years, and I did see, anecdotally, the rise and the heyday of the striped bass when it came back very strong. And I'm looking at the figures. Summer flounder right now we're at 54%. Sea bass we're at 35% of the quota so far. Striped bass, and thank you, Story Reed, for that fine presentation. I really appreciate it. Striped bass is at 34% of the quota so far. And Dan, you did mention that, why there could be a reduction in the taking of the striped bass. You just outlined that you went through several steps there, and I thought that was quite logical. But the fact of the matter is, there seems to be something going on. We talked about in a previous memo about anecdotally, regarding making decisions. We got the science, we got the anecdotal concerns. And I think I'd like to know why the catch for all of these species is low. Is it effort? Is it weather? Is it environmental? Is it low forage? are the predators such as seals. I'd like to know why, or if someone from the commission can shed some light on it as to why we think at this point of the game in the season, the quotas are low at this time. We're projecting that we might reach the maximum. We see the projections, and I'm just concerned that that there's a lot of factors that go into why the striped bass and the others are not producing. The inshore summer flounder is not producing as well as it has in the past. I mean, that was stated in a memo. And also I'd like to know, and I'm throwing out a lot of the things that I'd like to know. I'd like to know the profile of the striped bass fishermen. I think we said we had about 5,000 of them on the 4,000 to 5,000 of them on the record. But I'd like to know is the effort low because we have fewer striped bass fishermen out there trying to take the fish commercially? And I've also heard that the price per pound is around $6. And what's this going to do? We have a supply and demand right now, and I'd like to know where the demand is for striped bass in the market. There's a lot of questions I have, and so I'm really concerned about changing the goalpost and extending the commercial season for 2 more days. And I can understand the consecutive days. I understand that logic of allowing them to fish consecutively. But I need to say, honestly, I've got some major concerns as to, for the striped bass to allow an increase so that they can reach their quota. And right now they're having a difficult time reaching their quota. And I'm not sure they would reach the quota even if we extended it to 2 more days. But as you said, there are optics to this. People are looking at us. I'm a recreational angler. I don't have any commercial ties to any one lobster or to the scallopers or the draggers. I represent the recreational aspect of the fishery, and I think the optics to what I'm hearing from the Barnstable County contingent is that. And as you said, the fish are not at Scorton's Creek. They're not in Billingsgate. They're not in Pleasant Bay. They're not in Monomoy. Right now, they're off of Rockport and Nahant. And just last night, I received, I'm going to ramble on. Please give me the time to do this. Last night, I got a call from a very well-known charter captain, 6-packer. And he called me. He says, look, he says, I brought my anglers into the Rockport area, and we had 4 to 6, I can't recall what he said, commercial striped bass fishermen there, and they told him, please get out of here. We're trying to make a living. And the response from the charter captain, the 6-packer says, I'm trying to make a living also. And so we got this back and forth between the recreational and the commercials, and the optics is not good. And I think that if we were to pass this, and I think that it's not gonna sit well with the recreational anglers. Now, I am not against commercial fishing. We've set up 2 days for them to reach a quota. I have never bargained for commercial fishing to end, but I do feel that that extending it 2 days optically would not look good, and I'm not sure they would make the quota anyway. Thank you.
Have you other hands up, Jared?
Hello.
Tim Brady.
You recognize Tim?
Hi. I'm kind of following in line with Khalil there. I have some real questions as to whether our inability to reach the quotas in these commercial fisheries is something that is really due to weather or effort or whatever it is. But from a recreational standpoint, I really, and I've even actually heard this expressed from some of the commercial striper people, that they, although they would like more access, and everybody would like more access in every sector, but that they can work with, you know, a planned and, you know, a setup that continues through the season as stable as possible. So from a recreational standpoint, I don't think increasing the effort in any of these fisheries is something that that I would support, particularly in the striped bass fishery, and particularly coming from where I come from in the for-hire fleet, where we're recreational fishing, strictly recreational fishing. So that would be it for me. Thank you.
Mike Piernock has his hand up.
You're recognized, Michael.
Thank you. I have had many reach out to me recreationally, for hire, as well as commercial striped bass fishermen concerning this matter over the past few years, as well as recently. And I fish on the South Coast, the Elizabeths, and the Vineyard, and so on. That's where I fish, near shore, offshore, but near shore for striped bass. I mean, overall, there's no lack of striped bass from 23 to about right under the 28-inch slot limit there. There's tremendous numbers of them up and down the coast. And if you're from Boston Harbor on north, they're having a decent year. They're larger fish there. I personally think it's water temperature driven. I think our stripers are going all the way up to Canada and moving up there into those waters, out of our waters, but temperature and forage fish, but that's a discussion for another day. But ultimately, with the commercial striped bass fishermen that I've been in touch with that have been in this for a long time, they'll tell you they're lucky if they're catching 100 small ones, and lucky if they get one commercial grade fish out of 100. The fish just aren't there. And if you even made it 7 days a week, the fish are not going to be there. They're just not here to be caught. Now, ultimately, it surprised me with these individuals that reached out, commercial fishermen that are active and been active for a long time. They're proposing status quo. Just leave it alone, leave it be, because they don't think it's going to make any difference because the fish aren't there, whether it's 1 day a week or 7 days a week. So my opinion with this, what I've heard from many and what my observations are, and considering the issues with the biomass of striped bass, I would recommend a status quo and just leave it be. Ultimately, I don't think it's going to make any difference, and it could result in pulse commercial fishing pressure here and there that could impact the large breeders. And with the biomass being where it is, go with status quo. And once again, I was surprised all that reached out to me that, with the exception of a few, that were commercial striped bass fishing, they just said, leave it alone. So if I didn't hear that, my position may be a little different, but the fact that that is the case and the status with the biomass, I feel it'd be best to go status quo. Thank you.
Bill Doyle has his hand up.
You're recognized, Bill.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I support the director's recommendation. When I listened to the team that put it together, along with the director, it's their best efforts and great thinking that has gotten us to the point where we are. They're professional stock managers. I certainly am not. I think that if this is the recommendation that this team has put forward, I'm going to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Jared? Any other hands?
I'm not seeing any other hands up.
Is Dr. Armstrong on the call today?
He is.
Dr. Armstrong, could you address any or some of the issues brought up by Khalil about the stock being where it is and the size of the fish, and give a little history of where the commercial fishery has occurred over the years, starting off the vineyard many years ago, then it was Nantucket for a couple of 3 years, then it was off of Chatham for 4 years, and then it was off of P-Town for 3 or 4 years. And this year, I guess the commercial landings, for the most part, as Story has shown us, have come in from the North Shore, where historically they had a great fishery. You know, Plum Island, many, I'm talking 40 years ago now, 45 years ago. Could you address any of this for the commission members?
I can try, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to go on too long. A lot of what I'll say, I think you've heard me say before. There's so much going on today. The stock status is just a piece of it. And the stock status says large fish are down. And that's from 10 to 15 years ago. We had a series of poor year classes. And that was environmentally induced. So those are now in the 35, 34 plus range. So in fact, the catch rates ought to be low because there's less fish. But it's not catastrophically less. If you look at the assessment, we're down, but we're not down crazy. We're down probably 20%, maybe 25% of where we want to be, and we're building up slowly. So you have to consider the other causes, and Khalil mentioned them, that the environmental causes that are causing distribution changes in predators and prey are profound. So we have a smaller stock, but they've moved away from the Cape. You know, anecdotally, everyone tells us if you're a striped bass, you wouldn't go on the outside of the Cape if your life depended on it because there's so many seals. Well, they do have a little tiny brain. And so we've lost that fishery probably because of the seals. And there haven't been aggregations of sand lances, which is what accumulates these big aggregations of striped bass. Then we saw it in Cape Cod Bay a couple of years ago, a big accumulation of sand lance. So we haven't seen those aggregations of prey, the small prey around the Cape. We have possibly an anoxic zone developing in southern Cape Cod Bay, which will move the sand lance out of there. On top of it, we have these huge amounts of menhaden that went right by the Cape and are up in North Shore and all the way up into Canada. And that's, you know, that's temperature driven and zooplankton driven, which is also temperature driven. So the bass have followed them up. So it's no surprise the catch rates are terrible on the Cape. And then there's the temperature. The large bass do not like 72 degrees. Schoolies don't mind it as much. They're physiologically different. So it's my belief that the big bass, if you go out to the EEZ, you will probably find a lot of big bass. So anyway, I'll stop there. I don't believe that this profound lowering of the catch rate is because of the stock size. It's a piece of it, but it's redistributing and making them more difficult to catch. But, you know, I watch all the blogs as the fishery starts in, you know, April, as it moves up the coast, and you hear report after report, never seen so many big bass in my life. Goes all the way up, hits Block Island. Oh my God, the fishing, it's unbelievable. And then they hit Massachusetts, they disperse, and fishing stinks in some spots, and it's good in some spots. And so I think the stock it's not doing badly. So the most, you know, to me, the most profound thing is last year, both the commercial and the recreational fishery could fish on 34 plus fish. And in fact, the recreational fishery takes 4 to 6 times more of the larger fish than the commercial does in many years. So we eliminated the recreational catch. Now you can argue whether that's fair or not, but automatically you just got rid of 70% of the pressure on the big fish. And since the commercial is controlled by a quota, which is set through a scientific process that says it's consistent with the F we're trying to achieve, we're actually being way more conservative with larger bass by just having the commercial fishery on it this year. So I'll stop there. I hope that answers some of the questions. There's so much going on with this stock, but I can assure you it's not in a terrible condition. To some people locally it is, but that's a reflection of local environmental conditions. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Michael.
Mr. Chairman, may I speak? Khalil Bogdan.
By all means.
Thank you. In response to some of that, thank you, Mike. I'm thinking back to the ASMFC meeting in 2019, where in their document, they stated that the bass were overfished and overfishing was taking place. I mean, I think that says something right there. And in previous years, when we had the quota at over 1 million pounds, there was no problem. There was no problem taking 1 million pounds in several weeks. It just and the season closed down early. Now we're having difficulty. We're at 34%, and we're having difficulty meeting the quota. Now, is that because we have 5,000? We had 5,000 commercial anglers, and that's a quote unquote when I say commercial, because some of those are really recreational commercial. I'd like to know how many. What is the effort that's taking place now? What is the number of real commercial fishermen who are actually out there actively trying to make a living from this? And I want to say something for the record. I am not anti-commercial fishing, contrary to what some people may believe. I believe in commerce. I believe that the products of the ocean are there for us to harvest logically, and for us to be able to make a living from it and to provide food for people, seafood for people. I have no problem with that whatsoever. So even though I really am a recreational angler, which I have no commercial interest, except my commercial interest was running the business. I just like to know, what is the actual activity so far? I mean, I know we do monitor the fish on a weekly basis, I believe, as to their landings. Can someone on the commission enlighten us as to what are the real numbers, or the numbers of real active commercial fishermen out there currently?
Ray, the director has his hand up.
Director McKiernan, you're recognized.
Thank you. I would ask Story Reed for some help on the number of unique permit holders who are selling fish. But Khalil, I think you've asked a two-part question. How many active participants do we have, and how many fishermen are making a real living off of striped bass? If you think it through, a 2-day-a-week fishery prevents anyone from making a true living off striped bass. And so the policies that we've developed over time for this, almost unlimited participation, or no real constraints on participation, but just 2 days a week. Paul Diodati once called this a gateway fishery, and he wanted to maintain an open access fishery. So there are very few people who would depend on this exclusively for their living. But I think those that will take advantage of the fishery in the fall would be like a charter boat operator who's lost charters because of the constraints on travel, by tourists crossing state lines, or fishermen who tend to be kind of watermen who piece together a variety of activities, I'm sorry, a variety of species and gears, you know, that would want to take advantage of this. But I could not present to you any individual who's making money predominantly from striped bass, either on an annual basis or maybe even on a weekly basis. But it doesn't mean that the product isn't important for the markets. But this gets to what I am talking about in the final paragraph of the memo. I really want to take a look at this and figure out, okay, we have a quota. It's a lot of fish. Let's take it. I mean, let's figure out a set of rules. I mean, we might want to talk about having the commercial fishery could be conducted on the same slot as the recreational fishery, maybe. But right now we've opted to parse them out separately, and that was my endorsement, because I didn't want 5,000 permit holders, or 4 out of 5 permit holders who aren't selling fish, use the commercial permit as a means to just circumvent the restrictive bag limits. So anyway, and the other thing I just want to comment on is the 2-day-a-week system was devised when we used to take the quota. We used to clean it out July and August, and 2 days a week in July and August. There are very few days you can't go fishing in July and August, given our local conditions, because this is a small boat fishery. But once we hit the fall, when you get into September and later September, it's not easy to get out on every day. We have a lot of weather days, and also the fact that you have 2 fishing days separated by a no fishing day means everybody's got to get in and sell that fish before midnight. So you don't even have a full 24-hour day to deal with. So I mean, I've already heard 3 commission members not be in favor of this proposal, but I would ask if the commission members would compromise and go to a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday fishery, add 1 day, because I would like to see how the system would function with consecutive fishing days, which would allow fishermen to start their trip at 8 at night and then go until the next morning if that's what they wanted to do, nighttime fishing, because right now they can't do that. And so going back to the memo, there's so many ways that we're squeezing this fishery. And I absolutely concede that there's a lot of great fishermen out there who are telling us that the fish just aren't there right now. I get that. But come September, when all those fish that are off of Maine and up to the Canadian Maritimes and New Hampshire start moving through, as they do, heading back south, those fish will become more available, as Mike mentioned, when those temperatures drop. And I would like to create a fishery that's more conducive to making a trip safely and making, I don't say a living, but making a fish that's profitable. And I think we owe the participants an opportunity to fish safely and to fish on consecutive days. And so I would ask the commission to give me some feedback, because I don't think it's clear I don't have the votes. And I appreciate, Ray, the way you've run this discussion to give me the signals. But I would ask that the commission would compromise and just add 1 day on Tuesday. In the name of
It's back to the commission members. Do we have any hands up, Jared?
You do. You have Mike Piernock, Suki Sawyer, and Khalil.
We'll start with Michael. You're recognized.
Thank you, Ray. I have to say I agree with what Mike Armstrong said. You've heard it from me before, and we've heard it from Mike. We've heard it from the scientists of the status of the stock and why we think that the stripers are where they are. And I agree with him wholeheartedly. Unfortunately, Atlantic States Marine Fishery Commission manages the stock based on what's on the coast, not what we observe locally. So I think we're dealing with more of a problem that has to do with climatic shift and why we see the fish where we see them. Because those that fish from Boston Harbor on north, they're having a decent year. And if you're on Block Island, you're always having a decent year, because they really should be in the EEZ. And if we could fish in the EEZ, we wouldn't be having this discussion. But one thing that I believe we've all observed, I think, Ray, you can attest to this and a few others, is that it used to be when the bite was on at Chatham, tremendous fishing pressure would then go on by recreational and commercial in Chatham at Race Point. And now I'm hearing similar situations in Boston Harbor as a result of the fish being there. So I never thought I'd see the day that maybe limited access is something that needs to happen and needs to be considered in the future. You know, ultimately, with what you've thrown in the table, Dan, I agree with it. But I still, the fact that the commercial fishermen, the striped bass commercial fishermen that have reached out to me that have been doing this for years are saying, just leave it alone. I may ultimately abstain from the vote because if I didn't once again have that from them, I'd be concluding or my vote would be a little bit different. Thank you.
Suki, you're recognized.
Yeah, I agree with Bill Doyle's take on this about what the state's put into this whole process, and I'd be in favor of doing what the state wants. But to try to make this some kind of a pass here, I think I'd go along with I'd be in favor of just adding one day being Wednesday, so it'd be 3 days in a row. Maybe in September you can get out 1 or 2 of those days, but one of the concerns up here in the North Shore seems to be the fishing the night before the openings, like on Sunday nights and on Tuesday nights. And that would kind of eliminate some of that by having 3 days in a row. There'd be no reason to go out on the night. You could go fishing the night before and still sell the next day, because that's what they think the fisheries is going to be. You know, like the stripers are definitely going to go south at some point, and people are going to have access to them at night probably. The people that know what's going on in the striper fisheries do a lot of night fishing. So I'll be in favor of supporting, you know, just adding 1 day and going from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Suki. Khalil, you're recognized.
Thank you. It's a conundrum for me right now. I understand what Dan is saying. I think it was clear in my previous discussions with members from the commission that from the marine fisheries that I'm being looked at from many of the folks in Barnstable Harbor and Essex County, and I think I'd have a difficulty voting for. I have no problem with consecutive days. That's not an issue with me. And I thought of possibly a compromise going from the 4 down to the 3. And I understand where I can appreciate Bill and Suki's take on the fine work that the division has put into this. And this has nothing. If I have a negative vote, has no bearing on my respect for what goes on with the fine folks at the marine fisheries, none whatsoever. My vote would be strictly an optics vote as to how I'm going to be looked at from that broad group called the recreational anglers, and basically the group that I'm dealing with is from Barnstable Harbor, Barnstable County, and which is all the Cape, and from the Essex County folk. So I've got, it's an internal struggle I've got going right now. Could I live with a 3-day consecutive? I might, but then I'm going against my personal feelings that the quota is the quota. We gave the commercial anglers 2 days to do it. They're having difficulty even catching fish on the 2 days. So I think that my vote would be a no vote on this. And I'm torn. There's a great deal of anxiety going through my mind right now because you have to make a decision one way or the other. And so I'm having difficulty even though I've discussed this previously with fisheries folks there regarding a possible compromise. I'm having an internal struggle making that decision going from 2 to 3, definitely not 2 to 4. So that is my thinking right now, and it's really quite an issue. I just not. My feeling is that I can't vote for the increase. I just can't vote for the increase in days. I just wanted to throw that out. It's the optics of the matter right now for me. Thank you, Chairman.
Mike Piernock has his hand up.
Michael, you're right.
Can you thank you. Can you refresh my memory and the memory for the commissioners here on the commission, excuse me. If the state does not, or the commercial quota does not get used, then what happens? What's the process? And somewhat for the other species too. You don't hit the quota, then what occurs each year?
Well, nothing happens. Quota is not allowed to be transferred among states anyway. There is a new amendment that's being worked on. It is conceivable, though not likely, that a new management plan in striped bass could create new quotas based on past quota usage. We would oppose that, I think, but there's no automatic outcome or consequence of failing to take the quota. If you look at North Carolina's quota, they haven't taken it in many years because of ocean warming. The fish just don't come within 3 miles anymore. And as it's been mentioned, the EEZ closure really prevents North Carolina from using any of their quota in modern day, in the modern day situation. So there is no consequence that we would describe.
Thank you.
If I can ad lib here as chairman, number one, at our last ASMFC meeting, Delaware, so I'm more concerned about reallocation than the director is. Delaware, the commercial segment, is looking for reallocation. And I have a fear or a concern that if Massachusetts doesn't come near catching its commercial allocation, we are going to take a cut, and it's going to be redistributed to states that want an increase in the commercial allocation. Number two, I've been hearing a lot about optics, and DMF is a fishery management body, and they've got hired scientists and policy people, and they've given a lot of thought to this. Another point I'll make, I'm hearing something different than Michael from the commercial fishermen. They're saying, yes, please give us access to the fish. Down here on the Cape, as has already been stated, when those fish do move out of New Hampshire, Maine waters and leave the North Shore where they've had a terrific commercial fishery, lack of commercial fishermen because they haven't seen it in years. And anybody who has been fishing up there can attest to the fact of the number of stripers on the North Shore this year. But come September, commercial fishermen have to deal with weather days. And believe it or not, we're not fishing in a mill pond. And I would just like to put those thoughts out there. But I'm very concerned about DMF and the commission having to manage because of optics. And that's all I'll say. Thank you.
Ray, without any hands up, would the commission, or I'd like to recommend amending my my position, my recommendation to go to adding a third day of the week, Tuesday, which results in a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday fishery beginning on August 31st. September 1st. And I'd like the commission to vote on that if they would.
Well, then, can somebody write that up real quick and put it on the screen so everybody knows what they're voting on?
Sure.
Because I'm also hearing from commission members that they would like a subcommittee formed to really go in depth and study this commercial striper fishery, which opens up another door, Dan, and it's been mentioned for years now about definitions for a commercial fisherman in the state, with who and what is truly a commercial fisherman. But that being said, can you somehow weave in a subcommittee being formed to discuss striped bass?
Sure. I mean, we can create.
Meat.
Yeah, we can create a subcommittee even without a motion from the commission. You and I believe can make the request to the commission to participate in that. So if you could, Ray, I would ask that you get a vote on that motion and we can move beyond this one.
So are you going to put the motion up?
It's up.
Thank you, Jared.
Want to read it, Jared?
The recommendation is effective September 1, 2020, add Tuesdays to the commercial striped bass fishing week, going to 3 open fishing days per week, Monday through Wednesday.
So everybody has read the motion and everybody understands the motion. If not, please raise your hand.
Suki has his hand.
Suki, you're recognized.
I'm just voting in favor of the motion.
So you're approving the motion. I need a second.
Second by Bill.
All those in favor?
Aye.
You have yay votes from Suki and Bill.
Those who oppose?
Tim Brady, oppose.
You have opposed votes from Khalil and Tim. It's a
And
Mike Piernock, can you confirm you're abstaining or?
I was going to ask that.
Correct, I'm abstaining.
Ray, with the vote 2-2, the tie goes to you.
Well, I'll vote in favor of the recommendation.
Recommendation passes 3-2 with 1 abstention.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you, Director.
Okay.
And thank you, Commission members.
All right, so Ray will talk about creating a subcommittee either later in this meeting or at a future meeting. But I know Mike Armstrong and his team are very interested in analyzing a lot of data to better describe the fishery, consistent with some of the questions that Khalil was asking. I will say, though, that at this time, it's really hard for us to add a lot of workload onto our stats project because of the CARES. So we might want to postpone convening that group, at least in terms of delivering materials to that group until later in the fall because of the other things that our stats program is dealing with. So Ray, if we could, maybe we could move to the next 2 items and dispense with them as well.
Dan, before we do, we have Khalil with his hand up.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, may I have the floor?
Yes, by all means.
Director McKiernan, is it possible for that subcommittee to, we're going to have commission members serving on it, but would it be valuable to have an outside representative from the recreational aspect and the commercial aspect on that subcommittee also?
Well, it's a good question, Khalil. Historically, going back to around 2005, I think Paul Diodati began the convening of what was called a Striped Bass Advisory Panel. And what I want to do is I want to get together with the commission members to take their temperature on some of these more potentially drastic changes, such as limited entry or changing the, maybe overlap in the size or maybe the same minimum size. for the commercial sector to try to find a way to actually utilize the quota fully. I would prefer to have that conversation with the commission members, because I think we're ultimately going to go out and talk to these advisors anyway. But what I want to know how much of a stomach the commission members have for some of the more radical changes to the fishery, because my sense is that those meetings are very helpful, but they tend to be nibbling around the edges, and I'm asking for kind of a fresh look at it all. So I'd rather keep it to the commission at this time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and we can move along to the next agenda item, but I want to thank you and staff. I know you've been very engaged in the CARES Act, and now, as we see, the lobstermen might be ruled out of business by next May, and you've put together a committee of DMF employees to work on this reduction take permit.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand that DMF is, you're all over the place, and I just appreciate the hard effort the entire staff is doing on all these issues. And once again, we have another issue, and it's striped bass. But on top of that, I'll layer it right in commercial fishing and, access to permits for young guys coming into the fishery, the cost and whatnot. So I understand where you and your staff are coming from, but I'm also hearing urgency from commission members on addressing striped bass. So hopefully we'll be able to form a subcommittee that will meet and discuss and get right to the meat of the matter, as you so said, or you didn't say, as opposed to nibbling around the edges. Let's get right to the thrust. All right, that's all I have to say about that.
Okay, Ray, we'll be moving on to summer flounder next.
Yes, sir.
And I don't, it's a shorter memo, but essentially we're recommending an increase as of August 23rd from 400 to 600 pounds, and then go to 1,000 pounds on October 4th, and get rid of the no fishing days. It's been kind of a strange year among the fleet. There's, for a whole host of reasons, there is less effort going on in the Nantucket Sound dragger fishery, and that is also being felt by the Horseshoe Crab company, the Associates of Cape Cod, because they depend on bleeding some of those crabs caught as bycatch. So we know that there's less participation, and so we are recommending this increase. And if you turn the memo over to page 3, there's kind of this has a subtle outcome. It's not just giving the inshore vessels, those little day boats, more fish, but we really think the offshore fleet is going to be able to capitalize on this, because they will essentially have a 1,200 pound trip limit. And then when we go to 1,000 pounds in October, they'll be able to also capitalize on it then. What we're learning from our conversations with the fleet is that a lot of the saleable and larger fish are outside of state waters. But of course, we manage our fishery kind of for the state waters participants in Nantucket and Vineyard Sound. But the truth is there are other fish offshore that could come in at a higher rate. And we don't want to make the mistake we did last year, which is to underutilize the Fluke quota. We'd prefer that we reach it. So we know we need to liberalize things later in the fall, but at this point, we'd like to liberalize it sooner. So that is the recommendation.
And just to be clear on that, Dan, this quota was increased by GARFO by way of the Mid-Atlantic Council, correct?
That's right.
You had nothing to do with this. This is a Mid-Atlantic Council action.
Yep.
And the Science Center prescribed this higher TAC limit.
That's true.
Thank you. So where do you want to go from here on this? Have you
Well,
got-
I mean, I don't know how much controversy there is among the commission members on this. I guess open it up to the floor and see if there are any concerns with the recommendation. And if not, you
Okay.
can take a vote.
Okay, thank you, Director. We'll do that. Opening it up to the floor, the commission members. Please raise your hands if you want to comment on this.
I have my hand up, Chairman.
You're recognized, Khalil.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just curious. I'd like to learn a little bit more about the young of year, how that compares to previous years for the Fluke. Whether or not the scientists feel that we're right on target, that the population is healthy, and how things look for the future as far as the reproduction, and again, all the factors that go into if it is off, that go into why is it off. I'm just curious as to the health of the total Fluke population.
Ray, I would recommend Nicola respond to that.
By all means.
Sure.
Nicola, please.
Yep, thank you. So currently summer flounder is not overfished and not overfishing. The SSB, spawning stock biomass, is midway between the target and threshold levels. It has been declining since about 8 years ago, because recruitment has been below average for a number of years. So that was pretty much an expected decline. So the fishery does, feel different than it did 10 years ago, certainly when the SSB was above the target level, but it is not below the threshold. The fishing mortality, is not what has been driving that decline, according to the stock assessment, but it has been the recruitment. Early indications are that the 2018 year class is above average, but that's not going to recruit to the fishery for another year or so, 2 years. And there is not a really strong relationship between SSB and recruitment.
Khalil, does that answer your question?
So I'm not. So I kind of, you were kind of muffled, and maybe it's my computer in your response, Nicola. Thank you. So is the recruitment you're saying, the young of year, is it? How does it compare to previous years? And what are there any projections or graphs that would show what it might look like in future years?
It's very hard to project recruitment when you don't have a strong relationship between SSB and recruitment. But yes, when I talk about recruitment, that is the young of the year. And there were from 2010 to 2017, the year classes were below average. So that's what has produced a decline in spawning stock biomass. Still, it's in between the target and the threshold level. And in fact, and this will be covered later in some of the updates, the quota is due to increase next year by 8% on a coast-wide basis. And our quota in Massachusetts will likely go up more than 8% because of the new reallocation method that should be going into effect next year as well. So we'll have more quota next year as well. And that's an indication of the stock assessment that shows that the stock is still at a healthy level.
And I thank you, Nicola. I want to, this is maybe for Mr. Story to answer the question. What is, are we on target to reach the quota this year for flounder?
Jared, can you pull up that document?
Story Reed had that slide before. Is Story still with us?
Yep.
Story is
Can
with us. Story.
you hear me?
Is that up, Story? Are you saying
Yes.
that?
I'm seeing it. So, you know, in the current trajectory, we'd hit it in November, but that's not taking into account weather days in the fall, things like that, that might slow the fishery down. And that's using a projection based on the previous few weeks. So it's just a guide. I wouldn't trust it out to any time late in the fall.
Yeah. So there could be a lot of deviation or error in that in the graph. It could reach the ball early. It could not reach it at all.
That's right.
Okay. Thank you, Story.
You're welcome.
So Major Moran is on this call, and he's got a question for staff. Maybe it should be directed to Nicola. You might be able to give Major Moran an answer. Major Moran, you're
Thank you, Ray. I did get promoted 7 months ago, but I know you forget sometimes.
So what are you now,
my question,
Colonel or
Lieutenant Colonel?
I'm sorry. I apologize.
That's okay. I just wanted to remind you.
I mean, you get
my
promoted
question
every
was
3 months.
my question was that no matter what gets voted upon, the Fluke landing window remains in effect, no matter what. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so that's not going to change. That was my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel. Any other hands up?
Mike Peardnock.
Michael, you're recognized.
Thank you, Ray. Getting back to this figure here with the summer flounder, as it points out, 54% have been landed. Do you have a rough estimation by gear type of the distribution of that percentage? And then I have a few comments.
I don't have that handy. We're relying on dealer data for this, which is a little less reliable for gear type. We do know that the participation in the dragger fleet is down about 1/3, something like that this summer for a variety of reasons.
Okay.
Well, story is, we don't have the data. This has typically been a dragger-dominated fishery.
Yeah, they really drive the landings.
While inshore effort is down this year, anecdotally, we're seeing a lot of participation by vessels I would consider offshore boats in those pilot program. And through talking with them, they are fishing offshore under our pilot program and landing that, indicating that it's a predominant, lots of landings are coming from the offshore trawl fleet right now.
So I thank you for that, because if I'm interpreting you correctly, what you're pointing out is that those are landings in federal waters, not in state.
Catches coming from federal waters and counting against our quota, correct?
Okay, no, thank you. That's a good point. I mean, summer flounder, and I'll throw black sea bass in the same situation. It's not like the situation with striped bass with the biomass and the uncertainties and so on. I mean, the status of these stocks, they're healthy. And they're definitely not being landed for COVID reasons because there's no market and they're not going. And I know for me, I mean, I fish out in New Bedford and I go out and I fish Buzzards Bay, Vineyard Sound, and so on. And what we observe every year is that the water temperature increases, they go into deeper water, these species. And it's happening again this year. Well, black sea bass, not to some extent with the fluke, but past few years, we can see tremendous numbers of fluke at 14.5 inches, which I believe is the commercial threshold, but it's tough for us to catch the 17-inch fluke. And it's tougher this year than it's been the past two, where it typically would be maybe out of every 25 to 30, we catch one keeper size fluke. If you go to Nantucket, it's a different story, but there just been even questions there or concerns about what they've been catching this year. It hasn't been what they've seen in the past. But ultimately, I think the biggest player here is climatic shift. Temperatures increase, they're moving into deeper water. That's where I'm finding them. That's where others are finding them, and they're going farther offshore. Now, I can support what is on the table. But I would hope that, because I brought this up last year, and I'd just like to throw it out there again, that it was always my understanding that in state waters, DMS has done a great job of managing the different, the rec, the for-hire, and the commercial in order to set up the days and the seasons and the bag limits so there's not conflict. And so there's not significant impact that would reduce the potential landings for recreational and for the for-hire fleet. So I want us to be cognizant of that as we look forward to the future, to make sure we continue, that we address that. Because when you do put more days, then hypothetically, okay, then let's say they could fish more in Vineyard Sound. But what you're telling me is that's not the case here. They're going out into federal waters. And it makes a lot of sense because the water temperature is so high. I'm going farther off. I'm going in state or federal to do the same thing because the big black sea bass and the big fluke, that's where they are. So I support this measure, and actually it'd be the same with black sea bass with the same basis behind it. But they would hope in the future, for future discussion, we take that into consideration with the management. Because earlier this year, we were at a meeting in Hanover, the commercial fleet and the seafood dealers that I participated in, and we all said the same thing. It's a great thing that these commercial quotas got increased, but we all worried about whether we'd be able to even catch what the new thresholds were created for each one of these stocks. And we're seeing it now with the increases of the stocks. And so if you do such, just want to make sure it takes in consideration how it impacts recreational or for hire within those waters, that the shoreside angler, you don't want to have that person have less opportunity because those fish are being landed more often, so they can't. Or the one, or the boater who doesn't have a large boat that can go further offshore to get, or you know, in state waters, in deeper waters, can't go to those areas to have access to fish with them. So hopefully we can keep that in mind. Ultimately, I will support this as well as the black sea bass. And as I said, it's not similar to striped bass. That biostat bass and stock is a different situation with a lot of unknowns, but I'm comfortable with this moving forward. Thank you.
And Jared?
I'm not seeing any right. Just so you know, Bill Doyle has stepped away for a few minutes. He will be rejoining us, but we are down one voting member.
Okay, so.
We continue to have a quorum.
Yep, Ray, I think if you could call for a motion to support the director's recommendation, I think that'd be the next step.
So moved.
Let me pull that off, Ray. Give me 2 seconds here. All right, the recommendation should be back on your screen.
I need a motion for the recommendation submitted by the director.
Snooki Sawyer has made a motion.
Have I got a second?
Mike Pearnock, second.
Thank you. All those in favor? Please raise your hands.
You have 3 votes in favor: Khalil Bogdan, Snooki Sawyer, and Mike Pearnock.
Also, Tim Brady in favor.
And those opposed?
No opposition.
No opposition. Commission's voted this recommendation up unanimously. Moving on to black sea bass.
Mr. Chairman, may I jump in for a second?
Yes.
Would it be possible, Jared, would it be possible in the minutes to reflect basically a roll call vote for each of these items?
The minutes will reflect a roll call vote.
Thank you.
Okay, Raymond, black sea bass, if you can probably bring those up now if you'd like, Jared, as you did with the fluke.
Already done it.
Okay,
it's
great.
Up.
Yep. So recommending adding 2 days a week effective August 31st, and then beginning in October, adding 2 more days, going 7 days a week. Obviously, that's related to weather in the fall, and at the same time, increasing the pot fishery trip limit by 25% from 400 to 500 pounds, and increasing the hook and line limit by 25% from 200 to 250 pounds. All that is effective August 31st. I don't know if you need me to go into any more detail, but the memo captures the rationale pretty well.
Thank you, Director. I'll open this up for discussion.
I'm not seeing any hands raised.
I need a motion to recommend the Director's recommendation.
Mike Piernock has his hand raised.
Yeah, just a quick one. I indicated I would support this, but with the COVID situation, I'm just not confident that there's going to be a market for any of these and that it's going to be achievable. So hopefully this can provide some relief, but even if they can get out there, because there's plenty of them, is there a market? And I doubt if there's going to be, unless there's a major change with what's going on out there. But I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
Yeah, and if I can, history has told us in the past when DMF has looked at black sea bass, 95% of the commercial landings are shipped to New York, and then they're shipped nationally. So I personally wouldn't want to restrict a commercial fisherman just because of COVID. I would rather give him access, and as we already know, prices are down on black sea bass. But personally, I'm in favor of giving the commercial fishermen access to their allocation. Any other hands up?
I agree. Thank you, Ray.
I'm not seeing any other hands up.
So Michael's made the motion, I believe.
We don't have a motion yet, no.
I'm sorry. Would somebody like to make the motion on the Director's recommendation?
Sure, I can. Motion to approve.
Need a second?
Tim Brady, second.
Thank you. All those in favor? And I guess Khalil wants a roll call vote, so I'll start with Mike Piernock.
Correct, yes.
Tim Brady,
Yes, Tim Brady.
Suki Sawyer,
Yes.
Khalil,
Yes.
and Bill is still away from the meeting.
Yes, I believe so.
So we have a roll call vote. Those in favor, those opposed. Motion passes unanimously.
Okay, Ray, next on the agenda is the final action on the Cape Cod Canal
Yeah.
closure.
Yes. So who's going to run with this, Dan?
Yeah, I'll be very brief. This particular action is a follow-up to the emergency action that we took back in early June. The role of the commission in this action is to either approve or reject as a final rule that which we enacted as an emergency. Failure to approve it means that the regulation would sunset and it would expire, I guess, September 3rd.
Early September.
Yep. So by if you choose to approve my recommendation, then it will become a permanent rule or a final rule, and would remain on the books until further amendment. We conducted a public meeting or public hearing, so to speak, on Zoom. We didn't have a great turnout, but it was a Zoom call or a Zoom session that has been viewed by a number of members of the public. And then, of course, the public comment was overwhelmingly in favor of the action. And I hope the commission members had a chance to read through it, and I hope you were able to get all the way to the end of the document where some of the more colorful criticisms come in that sort of make us laugh. They're pretty insulting, but it's it's a tough business that we're in. But nonetheless, I would like the commission to approve this as a final rule. We did get support from the Army Corps of Engineers, and I believe the environmental police are also pleased with the outcome and the way things are being conducted down on the banks of the canal.
So I'll open this up to discussion before a motion is made. Any hands, Jared?
Cookie Sawyer.
Suki, you're recognized.
Yeah, I just comment earlier about talking about striped bass and catching the quota and the quota percentage low. I just wonder what the quota percentage would be right now if the canal had been open all summer. That's all.
Good question, Suki. Story, I think when we looked it up, we determined that the maximum amount of fish in previous years that were landed from shore down in that area was about 5% of the annual quota.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, so it's possible that you could add another 5% to the tally, but it wouldn't change the trajectory very much.
Any other hands, Jared?
Looks like you got Bass and Peerdenock.
Yes, Matt Bass and Mike Peerdenock.
Matt Bass, you're recognized.
I'm actually under Matt Bass today. I just wanted to say that MEP does support the recommendations.
Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel. Michael Peerdenock, you're recognized.
Thank you. I have had many reach out to me, and once again, I'm surprised that the vast majority are in agreement. I do not look at this as a conservation measure. I look at this as an issue with the unruly people that are out there causing problems for the Army Corps of Engineers to operate the canal for recreational purposes, which is their mission, to operate recreationally. And recreationally not only includes recreational fishing, it includes a whole wide array of activities. The fact that they've seen a relationship with this behavior and unruly activities during commercial fishing days, I look at that as the first step. Hopefully that'll be positive, because logic dictates that if it does continue, then there will be limitations to recreational fishing. They could limit when you fish, where you fish, whether you need a permit to fish. And I only hope that it doesn't go down that road and things do change. But ultimately, I will support this because they've reached out to us because of continued problems in hopes that this will work. And if it doesn't, then the additional steps will have to be taken to address those activities.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mike. Any other hands, Jared?
No other hands are raised at the time.
Mike Peerdenock, would you like to make the motion?
Sure, motion to approve.
Need a second?
Second, Suki.
Thank you, Suki. All those in favor? And I guess we'll just continue with the roll call vote the rest of the day. I think this is the last action item. Mike Peerdenock?
Yes.
Tim Brady?
Yes.
Khalil?
Yes.
Suki Sawyer?
Yes.
And is Bill Doyle back in the meeting?
He is not informed me he is back in the meeting.
So, 4 in favor. There is no opposition to it, so the motion is approved unanimously. We can move on. Jared, with the agenda, please. And could I suggest a 5-minute biological break? Maybe we'll get Bill back.
The next item on the agenda is a 15-minute optional break. We can make it 5 if you like, or?
How many people need 15 minutes? Okay, let's take a 5-minute break.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Jared, and you can queue up Bob's presentation.
Thank you, Jared. Good morning, everybody. Are we back from our 5-minute break? If so, please speak up.
Yes, I'm here. Mike Beardnut.
Thank you.
Back. Tim is back.
I'm back, Sookie.
So we're all back and we're in session. Bob?
Yes, I'm here, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Glenn.
All right, I'm ready to go. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Can you guys all see my screen?
Oh, yeah.
Perfect. All right, good morning. I just wanted to give you all an update of our ongoing process for trying to apply for an incidental take permit for several of our fixed gear fisheries, and also some future rulemaking that we're anticipating to have to do relative to the pursuit of that application. And I'll try to keep this very brief. So as you're all aware, we were sued by Max Strahan. He sued Executive Office of Environmental Affairs as well as DMF, among others. In April 2019, the suit was filed. And Strahan, it was an ESA citizen suit against Mass, and the complaint alleged that DMF violates Section 9 of the ESA by promulgating regulations that requires vertical lines, and that those lines are taking endangered right whales and leatherback turtles. Subsequent to that, in April of 2020, we received a memorandum in order on a preliminary injunction from Judge Talwani, and the judge found that the plaintiff was likely to prevail on his claim that the deployment of VBRs has and will continue to violate the ESA. And then she ordered DMF to promptly seek an incidental take permit under Section 10 of the ESA. So we have initiated that process. And then more recently, to give you an update, the Mass Attorney's General, at the end of July, the Mass Attorney General's office applied for a motion to stay for the duration of the process of the incidental take permit application. And the reason for this is that based on published information from National Marine Fisheries Service, they estimate that it takes roughly 2 or up to 4 years to go through an entire application process. And so the AG's office asked on our behalf to just put a stay on the suit while we are in the process of applying for the permit. We have not received a ruling yet back from the judge. Just to give you a quick overview of what incidental take permit is. Under Section 10 of the ESA, it is needed when a non-federal action, in this case, a state waters fishery, is anticipated to result in the taking of a threatening or endangered species. The ITP authorizes the take that will likely result from the otherwise legal activity. In this case, our otherwise legal activities are commercial fishing with buoy lines. As I indicated, it's an ITP application is a lengthy 2 to 4 year process. It's very resource intensive and requires constant coordination and collaboration with National Marine Fisheries and possibly the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The main part of an application, an incidental take application, is a habitat conservation plan, and that's what our group will be focused on. So subsequent to that, Commissioner Amadon, recognizing that it was a very heavy task, and he put together a task force to work on this, of which I'm chairing. And then the team consists of myself, Erin Burke, our protected species specialist, Bev Vuxen, and Tori LeBate, who are both the DF, Department of Fish and Game's legal counsel and assistant legal counsel. And then Anna Webb, who runs our statistics program. Jared Silva, who oversees marine policy. And then also on the task force is Eve Schluter, who is the Assistant Director of the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program at Mass Wildlife. And so we've, we have started our meetings. We're working on the application, and we've had some preliminary consultations with NIMS that kind of help inform the scale and scope of what our application is going to look like. As I indicated, that the habitat conservation plan is the most important aspect. It must include an assessment of likely impacts on protected species. It must include measures to be taken to minimize and mitigate for those impacts. It must also analyze alternative options that are not chosen. It must make funding assurances to make sure that we can pay for the cost of additional monitoring and or enforcement of regulations or of the plan. And then we also have to describe what additional measures we'll take to monitor and manage the species and their habitats. And essentially in this, to get the thumbs up, is that the mitigation must be sufficient for National Marine Fisheries Service to make a negligible injury determination for the species covered during the NEPA review process for us to obtain the permit. And so that's kind of a critical juncture that we'll have to come across. One of the issues that we're facing is right now, the primary fishery we're talking about is the Mass lobster fishery. And currently, under the Marine Mammal Protection Act, National Marine Fisheries Service lists every single fishery on its what's called its official list of fisheries, and under that they categorize each of fishery relative to risk, and it can go from category 1 through category 3, with category 1 being the highest risk fisheries. Currently, the Mass lobster fishery is part of the larger Northeast lobster fishery and is classified as category 1 with frequent interactions. Based on consultation from NIMS, we believe that in order to have a chance of developing a successful ITP application, that the Massachusetts trap pot fishery will need to be listed separately from the Northeast fisheries, from the Northeast lobster fishery on this list of fisheries. And the reason for that is when National Marine Fisheries Service reviews your habitat conservation plan and your mitigation measures, and you're trying to achieve that no injury determination, they look at it as how each fishery is classified. And so Massachusetts being part of the Northeast lobster fishery is problematic in our pursuit of this, because Massachusetts in effort and catch constitutes less than 10% of the entire Northeast lobster fishery. And so essentially we could completely eliminate the Mass lobster fishery and add no risk to right whales based on our portion of the fishery, but yet we still wouldn't be able to obtain a no injury determination because 90% of the effort outside our jurisdiction would still count against us. And so based on input from a National Marine Fisheries Service, we believe that this is really a critical first step. We're anticipating that list of fisheries gets published annually. We have a 30-day window after it gets published in the Federal Register for us to comment and request to them to take the Massachusetts lobster fishery and view it listed as its own separate fishery. But we still typically that gets listed in July is typically when they, but to this point they have not listed it yet. We're still waiting for them to publish the list, but we're poised to comment and make that request. Next slide. So one of the aspects in our consultation with NIMS of trying to be successful at getting our fisheries listed as separate is we will need to distinguish the Massachusetts fishery from the rest of the fishery based on a number of things, including like differences in what kind of gear is allowed, differences in the length of season, and other measures, like any type of conservation measures we can use that are unique to Massachusetts, that separates us from the rest of the Northeast lobster fishery, as well as the different circumstances we have relative to whale risk. And so our fishery is unique in that we interact with probably the largest aggregation of right whales in the U.S. at any one given time currently. So that also makes us unique. But to be successful, we're going to have to do, in both the application and also for this list of fisheries designation, there's some additional conservation measures that we've identified that are areas that we feel like we can show, one, separates mass, but also dramatically lowers risk to right whales when they are in Massachusetts. And so this list includes, for consideration, a seasonal pot gear closure in all Massachusetts state waters, lobster pot gear closure in Massachusetts state waters from February 1st through April 30th. And so that expands upon the current closure, which is the Mass Bay restricted area, which closes that portion basically from Cape Cod Bay around the Outer Cape and small portion of Massachusetts Bay. This would extend that closure through to include all state waters throughout the entire Commonwealth during that time period. We'd also propose a ban on all buoy lines using rope larger than 3/8 inch diameter. This is more of a de facto gear marking scheme. If you look at the entanglement record from right whale entanglements that have occurred in the last 5 or 6 years, it's predominantly been entanglements, and lethal entanglements specifically have occurred in line that is greater than 1/2 inch diameter, which is not consistent with what we know that the Massachusetts inshore fishery uses. The vast majority of our fishermen use 3/8 or less in diameter. And what we would like to be able to do is, by banning line larger than that, is to differentiate ourselves from all of the jurisdictions first, because no other jurisdiction has that rule, but also to be able to remove ourselves from implication in the entanglement record moving forward, because as I said, those large diameter lines are what's causing the entanglements, and to date we haven't been kind of exonerated from that, because the gear folks at NIMS would make the argument, well, you can't be 100% sure that it wasn't used in the mass fishery because your regulations don't ban its use. Even though it's consistent with either offshore lobster gear, or in the last several years, it's more consistent with Canadian snow crab gear from the Gulf of St. Lawrence. Another measure is something that we're kind of advancing from our conservation plan that we put forward into NIMS as part of the TRT rulemaking process this past year, and that's to require fixed gear in state waters to be equipped with a maximum of 1,700 pound breaking strength vertical line or an equivalent buoy line contrivance. This is based on published studies by the New England Aquarium. This measure alone is estimated to reduce the risk of serious injury and mortality by up to 72%. And so by advancing this and getting ahead of the curve relative to the rest of the coast-wide, other states that will be coming on board with this later, this will help us, by advancing it, will help us distinguish ourselves on the list of fisheries, and we'll we'll do something that we planned on doing anyways. Next is limiting the issuance of seasonal student lobster licenses to a max of 150 per year. Based on permit data that Story Reed put together, I believe the maximum number that we've ever sold for seasonal lobster permits is around 110, in that ballpark. The reason we put a cap at 150, we needed to put a cap because one area that NIMS will look at is the potential for any sector within our lobster fishery to expand. And so that because we have no cap on the number of permits like we do our commercial permits, our other commercial permits rather, they would point out that's a problem. They would, a risky area where they would, would be worried about gear escalation in the future. So to combat that, we're recommending to set the limit at 150 per year, a maximum, which is, again, we've never achieved that, but it sets a maximum upward cap to at a reasonable number and still allow some expansion. The other measure is kind of closing up a loophole that we have. It's an extension of the existing January 1st through May 15th Cape Cod Bay gillnet closure along the state waters, roughly from Gurnet Point to the south entrance of Situate Harbor. This is kind of a leftover loophole that when NIPS did all the rulemaking relative to the closure, NIPS didn't specifically close gillnet gear. And so we have a small sliver of area in Massachusetts that opens up to gillnet fishing in April that still poses a potential risk. And so we're just trying to close that and extend that closure to May 15th to allow for the time period for which the whales typically depart our waters. And then there were a couple of measures we're also considering for our recreational fishery. Those include establishing a season from Memorial Day to Columbus Day. This represents when the vast majority of all recreational 10-pot fishing effort occurs. And we would, we want to try to make a definable open date and end date so that we can, two things is one is to try to not to discourage people from leaving their gear out and then also during a time period after which any gear that's left behind, we can then work on retrieving it to get it out of the way of whales. In recent years, when we go in the wintertime during the closure in February to clean up abandoned gear in the closed area, a disproportionate amount of the gear that we're finding out there is abandoned recreational gear. And so we'd like to get a jump on that by ending their season in mid-October. And then also consistent with the commercial regulations, we were considering requiring all 10-pot fishermen to use either 1,700-pound rope or contrivance like a sleeve that breaks at 1,700 pounds on their vertical lines. And so just a last slide here quickly to wrap it up. Our next steps, the conservation measures that we need to distinguish the Massachusetts trap pot fishery under the LOF must be in place before the distinction can be granted. So in our discussions with NIMS, essentially they indicated to us that they couldn't give us credit for things that we say we're going to do. They would only give us credit for things that are in place. So it's important for us to move along on this rulemaking if we can to get it in place so that when at least at the latest by next year's list of fishery designation, we will have them in place and be able to make our case. DMF, let's see, I'm sorry, I lost my place here. DMS rulemaking timeline won't work for this year because we're expecting that the list of fisheries this year to be published any day now. And so while we will make comments and try to request it, we realize we won't have these additional measures in place in time for this particular year. So, but at least we can start to make our argument and get comments back from NIMS on that with the plan of having them in place before the 2021 list of fisheries is published so that we can make a successful request at that point. And, as I indicated, we feel that, this distinction is kind of critical to the success of us getting this incidental take permit, because without it, we'll essentially have to account for the risk associated with the entire Northeast lobster fishery, which we would have no way to do. And so with that, I'll take any comments or questions.
Jared, any hands raised?
Khalil Bogdan.
You recognize Khalil. Let me just thank Mr. Glenn for the comprehensive presentation. The floor is open to you, Khalil. Khalil?
I'm sorry. I said thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Glenn, for a very nice presentation. It was very informative. Mr. Glenn, what is the number of average entanglements that occur over the past several years with the right whale?
In Massachusetts waters?
Yes.
Okay. We've had two actually in the last decade, we've only had one non-lethal entanglement with a right whale. That was in September of 2016. The whale was successfully disentangled and lived to actually, fine. And I believe that one was sighted with a calf at a later point. Prior to that, the only other confirmed right whale entanglement in Massachusetts waters was in 2009, and that was another one that was successfully disentangled, non-lethal.
Yeah, so in essence, the episodes are really kind of rare.
They're extraordinarily rare.
And then, so what has brought us then to this point where it is so rare, and it's unlikely that we're going to have a large number of times? How have we gotten to this point that we're needing to make all these adjustments?
So starting in 2017 to now, there's been what's been called an unusual mortality event. It's a classification that National Marine Fisheries Service makes. During that time period, 31 right whales have confirmed to have died by anthropogenic causes, either a combination of ship strikes and or entanglements.
Okay.
Out of those 31, 20 of those occurred in the Gulf of St. Lawrence in Canada. Either half of them are roughly from ship strikes, the other half are from entanglement in both lobster and snow crab fishery. In the U.S. side, of the 10 that occurred in the U.S. or the U.S. is responsible, 2 of those are whales that died south of New England, entangled in Canadian snow crab gear. So really, when it brings it down, we're talking about 8 mortalities that we can attribute to the U.S. lobster fishery, in this case, the Northeast lobster fishery. And so that's kind of what's pushed National Marine Fisheries along to make, to start the TRT process, the process we worked on for the last 2 years to develop measures that would reduce the risk of serious injury and mortality for the U.S. portion by 60%. The reason why we're here right now is because Mr. Strahan sued our agency for authorizing the use of vertical buoy lines and basically indicating that we're responsible for causing this harm. And the judge found that didn't necessarily come out and say that we were responsible for the harm, but pointed out, which is true, that we're in violation of the Endangered Species Act because we've had a take and because we don't have the required incidental take permit. Now, there isn't any fishery on the East Coast that has an incidental take permit for a pot fishery. There are a few states working on it. North Carolina has an incidental take permit for their gill net fishery, but their inshore occurs in the sound, so they don't have any whale interactions. It's primarily for the take, they have takes of turtles. Really to answer your question, the reason we're here is because of litigation and because we're being ordered by a federal judge to obtain an incidental take permit.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Glenn. I appreciate your answer.
Thank you. Any more questions for Mr. Glenn?
Mike Pierdock has his hand raised.
Michael, you're recognized.
Thank you, Ray. My question, well, thank you for the presentation, Bob. My question is our proposed measures consistent with the federal measures? Don't they have to also come up with a plan? Or is this just specific to Massachusetts? And if the feds are coming up with a plan, or is our proposal consistent with theirs, or maybe we don't even know? I just throw it out there. Thank you.
Sure, I can answer that. So most of the measures in what I outlined today were part of our conservation plan that we had already submitted to National Marine Fishery Service that we worked on in collaboration with them and the other states. And so it's consistent with that. Their rulemaking process is relative to those regulations is in the queue, but they've also been sidelined with litigation. And so the process is a bit slowed down, but we anticipate that many of these things would come through the federal process, and we would be required to make complementary regulations in the state by next year. The one different thing that we're proposing here that's of substance is the extending the closed season to all the state waters. This we're doing because one part of risk that is of risk to whales that we have in Massachusetts is the during the time period when whales are leaving in late April and early May, they tend to head north. And in recent years, we've seen a number of sightings in the Massachusetts Bay Area, around Boston, and even up on the North Shore of right whales at a time when that area isn't closed and there is gear in the water. And so to be able to demonstrate that we're removing that additional risk, and also distinguish our fishery from all the other fisheries. There aren't none of the other fisheries, lobster fisheries that are part of the Northeast lobster fishery have a seasonal closure. And so we would further be distinguishing ourselves from those fisheries by having all the state waters fisheries closed at a time period when right whales are common in our area.
Thank you, Bob. Any other questions for Bob?
Yeah, I just have an additional question. Well, it's news to me, but I'm not up in this topic that you would close all state waters. It just kind of surprises me. But I know you have to protect the right whales, but I'm just concerned about that and whether that is overkill.
Yeah, so I share your concerns, Commissioner. I guess our attempt here is first and foremost is we're trying to take measures that ultimately will make us successful in getting the incidental take permit. The alternative to getting the incidental take permit could be an order from a federal judge to basically suspend the use of all buoys in our fishery, which would be completely devastating to our lobster industry and our other pot fisheries. And so we're trying to be aggressive enough so that we can achieve the no injury determination with NIMS by using a measure that, while it definitely will have some impact to the fishery, it occurs at a time when less than roughly 3% of our state's lobster catch occurs. So we're trying to have that closure at a time that'll have the least amount of impact to the fishery, while giving us the biggest potential to be successful in our application. So it's kind of a balancing act.
Yeah, I just for instance, I don't know if they've ever been found in Buzzard Bay. So when you say all state waters, that's where, even on the North Shore, but I don't know enough about them spatially, where they go and so on. Just hate to see the whole state waters be shut down. But once again, I throw it out there and understand what you're coming from, because I'm concerned of the impact to everybody as a result of that action. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Commissioner Hammond just put this team together, and I think we have to let the team vet the whole situation. So I hold back on comments until we see what the proposals are. They have a lot of work ahead of them. So are there any more questions?
I have, Mr. Chairman, I have a question. Khalil here.
You're recognized, Khalil.
Thank you, Mr. Glenn. Again, getting back to closing all state waters, understanding, or maybe I misunderstood, but understanding what you said is that predominantly a lot of the right whales suffer from the demise of boat strikes rather than entanglements. How is this going to play out as far as state waters with reduction of knottage steaming out or boats in the waters?
Right. So roughly, in recent years, roughly 50% of the mortalities are from ship strikes. So it's a 50-50 thing. Right now, at this point, we don't have any plans to extend the speed restrictions that we have in Cape Cod Bay and the Mass Bay restricted area beyond that area. Those type of measures are most important when whales are really dense. And so in some cases in Cape Cod Bay in late April, we can have as many as, we've had up to 176 whales spotted in one day surface feeding out in eastern Cape Cod Bay. And so situations like that, when they pop up, these feeding aggregations, it's important for vessels to go slow. Luckily, at least history so far would dictate that those feeding aggregations only occur in Cape Cod Bay inside the Mass Bay restricted area. We have not seen them in Mass Bay up towards Boston or Gloucester. So with that in mind, at this point, we don't see a need to extend speed restrictions up there. Although, in the future, if whale aggregations did occur up there, we would have to consider it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Glenn, for your presentation. As I said earlier, we're just beginning this process, and I'm sure commission members can talk to you offline. And I'm sure you'll keep us apprised and updated as you move along. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, Mr. Glenn. Jared, can we see the agenda, please?
Yeah, Bob's just going to make me the host.
So Ray, next on the agenda is update on issues related to COVID-19 and the seafood and fishing industry. And the first sub-bullet under that is CARES Act fisheries relief in Massachusetts. And Kevin Creighton is the top person on that for us. We've convened over a dozen DMFers. We've split them into 4 groups, each working on each sector. There's the for-hire sector, there's the aquaculture sector, there's the commercial fishing sector, and there's the seafood dealer and processors sector. And we are making some progress on that. The party boat monies were already paid out back in early July. And now we're working on some other applications. I think Kevin has a few slides. Kevin, are you on and available to show those few slides?
Sure. Yep, I can do that.
All right, great.
Good morning, Kevin.
Good morning. How you doing, Ray?
Good, good.
Sorry, we're having just a technical issue here.
It's all right. Jared, you have those slides too, right? If you want
Yeah. I haven't been made host yet, so I can.
All right, that's okay. I can just run through a real quick timeline because I know you guys have been introduced to this before at past commission meetings. And when I was just looking back at some of the dates, it's really something. This was passed May 7th, the CARE Act.
March 7th, I think, Kevin, right?
The actual passing of the bill, though, was May, I believe.
Okay, all right.
And then within a week, Dan convened a team, a DMF team that actually includes 14 DMFers. And as Ray noted previously, we got all this CARES Act going on, the stuff that Bob's doing now, still all these management plans, but the folks have been truly extraordinary, the amount of effort that's been going into getting this done quickly. So within a week, June 1st, first advisory panel meeting. And then by mid-June, we had already had 4 working groups meet, a total of 8 times, and we submitted a spending plan to NOAA by mid-June. We didn't receive approval on that until July 15th, and then 5 days later, July 20th, all payments went out to the headboat sector. So that was pretty quick. We allocated $416,000 to the headboat sector. And so average payments were just over $12,000 for those 34 that received payments. At the same time, we were developing a process for the for-hire charter boat and aquaculture. Both of those went out at the same time, which was August 3rd. Actually, applications were in the mail. So 700 to the charter boats, another 400 to the aquaculturists. All those are coming in right now, and they're being reviewed as they come in. We're updating the website daily, so people can look to make sure that their application made it to us.
Kevin, the slides are up
so,
now.
So Jared's just showing the dates here where we're at. We just mentioned for hire and aquaculturists. The due date on those coming in, the postmark date is this Saturday, and then we're hoping within a 1 week period we can have all appeals finalized and be able to know exactly what the allocations for each individual person is based on how they've been tiered or placed in bins. The other one, the seafood processor, that was handled a little bit differently. Story put together a survey that we did by initially email, then direct mail, and then phone calls to make sure we touch base with everybody. In that sector, we were basically scaling businesses using number of employees as a proxy for size to bin these, the seafood processors. In that application, we had a little snag this past week with some clarification we needed from NOAA, but that application is scheduled to go out this Friday. And they're going to have a 3-week period for returning those, and we expect very few appeals in that sector because of the survey that was done ahead of time. So those 3, seafood processors, aquaculturists, and the for-hire charter, should all be wrapped up around the same time. The commercial fishing sector, that was delayed an extra month, not delayed. The working group had wanted to add the month of July for a qualification period so that when people were demonstrating the required 35% loss as compared to previous years, they could include that additional month. And we are staggering it a little bit because we expect a fair number of appeals in the aquaculture sector, in the commercial sector, and a lot of that burden falls to our stats folks. They were doing all the work up front for tiering these, and they're going to be helping on the back end dealing with appeals to make sure everybody's catch was credited appropriately. So our goal is to have the entire thing pretty much wrapped up. You can see here payment timelines on the right side. Early September, charter aquaculturists, probably a week or 2 later for the seafood processors, and then the whole thing done by 1st or 2nd week of October. So, I mean, it's been incredibly fast, but we've had a lot of support both in-house and with advisory panel and the working groups.
Thank you for your presentation, Kevin. I know you and the entire DMF staff have been working diligently on this CARES Act relief program. Questions for Kevin?
Khalil?
Yes, I thought that was a great presentation. The for-hire charters, who are the for-hire charters? What constitutes that category?
Sure. We sell permits for the for-hire industry here in Massachusetts, and folks are either a charter boat, which is a 6-pack license, or we call them party boats. Some people call them head boats, for any 7 passengers and up. So we have, roughly 700 permit holders, and the way that if you can go online and take a look at the actual plans, but the way that one was ultimately eligibility requirements for that, you had to be a true charter fisherman, and the threshold was at least 50 for hire fishing trips in either 2018 or 19.
Okay. How would so was it up to the charter boat captain to apply for the CARES Act Fisheries Relief Program, or were applications actually emailed?
We went to our licensing database, and even though we, based on information that we have, we expect out of the 700 permit holders that maybe only 200 are what you would call an active charter boat fisherman. We mailed them to everybody. We wanted to give everybody the opportunity. We have very limited information on the charter industry, and we could only pre-qualify about 15 of those 700 based on VTR records. everybody else, we know that there might be as many as 200 that will ultimately be qualified, and they're just providing some additional documentation, looking at tax records for the most part to demonstrate those 50+ trips.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Hey, Ray, if I could just add just one thought to Kevin's presentation for the commission. Each of these sectors was being subjected to two things, a filter and a scaler. The filter is, okay, we have a lot of permit holders. Who do we want to grant, who do we want to make eligible based on some criteria, and who do we want to make ineligible? So as Kevin just mentioned, the 50 trip threshold determined whether someone was eligible or ineligible. And then the scaler among the eligible boats, Kevin, I believe it had to do with vessel length.
Right. Yep. So 2 tiers in that one. It was the small boats, and then the large was over 28 feet.
Yeah. So the larger boats would get a slightly higher payment, or a higher share than a smaller boat based on that cutoff, and that cutoff was based on the input that we got from the members of the working group for that particular sector. So if you go to the other sectors, the filter for commercial fishermen was at least $15,000 in fishing revenues based on sale of fish in one of the last 3 years. In the case of aquaculturists, I don't think we had a minimum, but we have a scaler that we have like 6 or nine different tiers that, depending on the income that we have for the business in our records, we put them into a bin, and there's 9 different bins, and it's a tiering effect. On the the seafood dealer side, the company had to self-declare that they have 70% of their income that comes from seafood products, and at least $100,000 in business over the last few years. And then we scale that particular payment based on the number of employees. So we're asking the company to provide certain tax records about the number of employees that they have on their payroll, and that would include temporary employees as well. So those are the kind of things that we depended on the working groups to give us advice on, the filter and the scaler.
Ray, you have questions from both Mike and Khalil.
We'll start with Michael. Michael, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Dan and DMF and Mike Armstrong and Nicola and everyone from DMF that put all this together, had us to participate in the process, and made this happen. Thank you very much for doing that. I do have a question, though. This is for relief if through June 30th, I believe it's June 30th, if you had a reduction in your bookings, say for hire of 35%. And, we kicked around before, there's a lot of people north of Cape Cod that really didn't kick the season until after that date. Is there any information out there of any additional funds that may be coming our way that could be applied to the for-hire fleet after that date that would be more applicable to the people north of Cape Cod all the way up to the border? Or is there still no funding for that?
Yeah, Ray,
on that?
I can handle that. I have had conversations with Senator Markey's staff about 3 weeks ago, but your guess is as good as ours in terms of other congressional relief packages. It would all be included in whatever's happening at the national level, and I have not heard of any additional funds that are forthcoming in the last 3 weeks. I haven't heard any.
Because it seems to be consistent in general. Typically, the for-hire have 50% or less bookings. There's some guys that are maybe 60%, but it's still not looking good. And unfortunately, with the recent August 1st 14-day quarantine period coming into the state, that had a lot of cancellations. So there's still a lot of pain out there. Hopefully some money, we'll see some money to help the fleet. Thanks.
Leo?
I was going to ask a similar question, so my question has been answered also. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ray, I'm seeing no more questions.
Shall we move along?
The next issue is some seafood marketing update. And I think Story Reed, on behalf of Wendy Maynardi, has a few slides on that.
I do. Jared, can you make me the host? So we just wanted to give you an update on what Wendy's been up to since your last meeting. And I'm going to share my screen right now. So can you see my screen now? Great. All right, so one thing that we put together since your last meeting was a 5 or 6 week radio promotion in 4 different radio districts, I guess you'd call it, in the Commonwealth. So the Boston Market, Cape Cod, Springfield, and Worcester, and that featured 2 different messages that were both recorded by Billy Costa, a local radio personality. And we got really good feedback on this, both from people in the industry that heard it and reached out. You know, people just would hear it and be really excited to hear about local seafood, even people not in the industry, consumers. So we got a lot of good feedback. And I also think what's interesting about switching some of our marketing efforts from in-person, say, events and shows and things like that, to online and something like a radio promotion, we get numbers like this gross impressions and total impressions number. And I'm not going to pretend that I understand all of it, but these are distinct instances when these ads were played on the radio or viewed by somebody on social media. So it's interesting to have those metrics. And I think it was clear that this local seafood message was widely heard. Oh, we get it.
Can you turn that up, Story?
I can't. So could you hear that? I didn't intend to play it, but it played.
No.
No. Okay. So it played in my headset on my end. Sorry about that. But I
I
think
can
we
share
sent it
this
around.
presentation.
Yep. I think we sent it around before and you heard it. It was a good message. The next thing that's been going on is a local chef series. So Wendy, through one of our partners, has reached out to local chefs and asked them to provide us with recipes, including pictures on local seafood. And this has been great on our social media, and it's being built out on our webpage. You see the address there, and we'll send this along. So some good recipes there that have been getting good reach on social media. Next up, I believe, is a spotlight on sea bass. And so we've got a couple recipes coming out on that later in the week. And then the next part of this are seafood how-to videos. This has to do with preparing certain seafood to cook. So Wendy's got 4 or 5 of those videos that she's been shooting out on the Cape that will be coming out shortly. Here's more images from the chef series. I've been pretty impressed with what these chefs have been sending in, not only the recipes, and they're simple enough for even me to cook, but the great photos that our iPhones and smartphones take these days. It's been really good. The next big one she's been working on is the Food Security Infrastructure Grant Program. And this was really a Department of Agricultural Resources, or MDAR, initiative. But from the beginning, they wanted to include the Department of Fish and Game and DMF in this effort and make these infrastructure grants available to seafood businesses. And so due to COVID impacts, there was a concern that that families weren't getting the protein they needed, and especially local protein. So the goal of this grant is to provide those avenues for businesses to get that protein to local consumers, and it's largely through infrastructure improvements that this grant program is targeting. And there's upwards of $36 million available for this grant program. It's been a rolling grant program, and there's still plenty of time to apply. It goes through the middle of September, and we can forward on more information about that. As of the time that Wendy put this presentation together a few days ago, there had been 3 grants issued to seafood businesses. You can see them on the screen. We can forward this along again. But interesting, everything from a new fish processing line to an aquaculturist wanting to add a walk-in cooler so they could ultimately be permitted as a wholesale dealer and sell shellfish directly. So a lot of it has to do with businesses either pivoting or kind of upping their infrastructure so they can get into new markets. And Wendy texted me last night that it looks like there's 3 more that will be approved in the next round for seafood. So that's good news. So she just wanted to pass along information if you know somebody who has applied or is applying, that these kind of tips here, many applications both for the seafood industry and agriculture have been sent back for more information. It is very competitive. Kind of the equity piece, and by that we mean reaching local consumers with local food matters in the application. So she's been part of the review process, so she wanted to highlight that. And the deadline is September 15th. So there's plenty of opportunity left. The other initiative that MDAR has spearheaded and we've been a part of is this Mass Grown Exchange, which is a new online platform that basically it matches wholesalers that have product to sell and retailers that are looking for local product to sell, if that makes sense. Sort of just creating those business-to-business connections. And this is something that we heard about early on in a seafood group that Senator Tarr started, that seafood businesses just didn't know how to get the word out sometimes that they had certain products that were available. And so this Mass Grown Exchange happened because the same stuff was going on agriculture, on the agriculture side, and they invited us to be a part of it. So we have been doing some outreach on this, letting people know, trying to promote it. We're going to do more of that coming up. And this is just a snapshot of the exchange platform from last night. You can see it's very simple, but on here you'll see wild Cape Cod mussels being offered by Cape Cod Shellfish, a wholesale dealer on the Cape. One thing that we're I don't want to say we're concerned about, but we wanted to monitor a little bit to make sure that the businesses offering items for sale on here are properly permitted. So we're going to work with MDAR on that. And that's the update that we have for now.
Well, once again, thank you, Story and Commissioner Ron Amidon. I was on the Zoom call last week, and a lot of effort by both DMF staff and the Commissioner's office on this to get fisheries involved. Thank you very much. Questions for Story?
I'm not seeing any hands, right?
Thank you, Story, for an updated presentation on MDAR and Mass Grown Exchange.
You're welcome.
Ray, the next item under this heading is the extension, new workplace safety standards for the for-hire fleet. I believe Ron may have covered that in his opening remarks. So I'm not sure we need to review it again, but in essence, the for-hire fleet has been constrained to a maximum of 50 persons at this point. Maybe the folks, maybe Tim Brady wants to share his insights into that, but I know there was concerns about some of the larger passenger vessels and the need for social distancing and masks. But anyway, so that was a governor's order, but I think it was covered by Ron earlier.
Tim, have you got anything to add? Well, not getting a response. Let's move on.
Yeah, Ray, this is one of your favorite topics, the extension of the for-hire black sea bass fishery, and then there's the Gulf of Maine cod fishery as well. I know Mike Pierdonac also has a strong interest in this, having been involved with those, especially the council committee. The notice went out last week. We successfully petitioned the ASMFC, the board, the Black Sea Bass Board, to accommodate us. And as you know, Ray, Nicola did a very convincing job, and she had a lot of great help from the technical staff to produce the analyses. And I think it was a combination of a few things. I think some of our neighboring states supported us, which was great to see, and they were sensitive to the needs of the for-hire fleet. Everybody knows this has been a terrible year, and even though we don't expect to be a huge bump up in business, I think it was in many ways a moral victory, and we hope that the fleet can take advantage of that. I also think that people were impressed with the technical aspects of the proposal, that, you know, we didn't come there just begging. We actually came in with some pretty sound analyses, but what we wound up doing at the end was asking for a compromise between two different options, one that the TC preferred, which was more conservative, and one that we thought was more reasonable. And so what we wound up asking for is basically an extension of the black sea bass fishery for the for-hire fleet that would take us to the end of the Fluke season. So it was a good compromise. And then of course, I think Nicola did a very credible job, and I credit her with having some good working relationships with those other states, because she's involved in so many interstate working groups. She's got a lot of credibility, and I'm sure you'd agree with that, Ray. As far as the cod fishery goes, that was just announced by NIMS, and they're adding another, was it 14 days, Jared, in the fall?
Yeah, one week at the before and 1 week after, so September 8th through October 7th, I believe.
Yeah, and I know Mike Pierdonac, you were a big proponent of that. And Melanie is on the call if there's anything you'd like to add, Melanie, to that. And also the new rules have come out for next spring as well, and we'll go to rulemaking for the spring rules, but for these for-hire specific extensions, we're going to do what we did with the black sea bass rule change, which is to send out like a letter of authorization, basically amending their permits by conditioning their permits with this liberalization. So Ray, I don't know if Melanie wants to add anything, or.
Melanie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, Dan, you certainly covered it. I was going to hop in with that spring edition, but yeah, it's been a little bit of an odd process this year, both because the council had gone through its normal recommendation process to NIMS and had suggested that early April opening for both private and for hire, but then had a second bite at the apple to discuss kind of the COVID impacts. And that's where that fall extension just for the for hire came from. So that also obviously impacted rulemaking coming pretty late this year, and so necessitating this unique process by us too this year for conditioning the permits and then our normal rulemaking. So no, I don't have anything else after that.
I think it demonstrates there's a lot of reasonable people making fisheries management decisions these days, if I could editorialize. The next issue has to do with the limited entry permit transfer policy on active fishing. This was an issue that Suki, on behalf of MLA, brought to our attention. And you heard Lou Williams earlier at a previous meeting talk about how some fishermen, because of either difficulties of getting crew or concerns about the virus and being in close proximity to others, there are some fishermen, especially older ones, who may be taking a year off from fishing, and they didn't want that decision to affect the ability to transfer a limited entry permit, especially in those years. I'm sorry, under the rules that say a permit needs to be active in 4 out of the last 5 years. So what we've done with the policy is made an exemption for this year, 2020, the COVID year, that we wouldn't be counting this year as a year that one needs to demonstrate actively fished, records in order to transfer the permit. So we'd give this year a pass. We're not amending. I'm sorry. We're not going to waive the rule. We're just going to waive this particular year.
Thank you.
Resumption of federal aid observer program. This has been a controversial issue up and down the coast. NIMS has reinstituted it, I guess, as of this week, and I guess there's some challenges with waivers being requested, and the fact that observers do need to move from state to state and conform with various states' quarantining policies, and makes it especially challenging. We did get some requests for clarification. I got one from the Port of New Bedford about whether these particular persons would be this activity would be subject to an exemption. And just as a commercial fisherman who might travel from his home in Rhode Island get onto a boat in New Bedford, that person would be exempt under as our understanding goes, under the governor's new requirements, because it's considered an essential business. Also, a Rhode Island commercial striped bass fisherman who trailers his boat to Massachusetts and goes striped bass fishing, that's another exempted activity because it's commercial fishing. We've revised those who have asked that the observers are also part of an exemption because they're servicing an essential business, and the business is required to accommodate them. So I don't know, Melanie, have you heard any more coming out of Garfo on the observer mandates?
Not more from Garfo. I mean, I think that that clarification on the exemption status is certainly helpful on the logistics end, but there's still a lot of uncertainty and rancor, with this coming back in. One of the big pieces that remains, obviously, is kind of the insurance end, both in terms of indemnification as well as, insurances are not going to, there is no insurance coverage for this. So both in terms of risk to observers from the crew or from transmission from the observer to the crew. So that's a huge one that's still, front and center for fishermen. And I'm sure most of our commission members have way more experience with that than, my knowledge of it right now. I know NIMS did try to provide these national level criteria. It's pretty generic and high level. And I think they probably raise more questions than they help with in terms of, everything's really still left to that third party observer provider. I would note that for folks that are interested, the observers have to address a bunch of these issues and standards in their redeployment plans, and they're available. There's links. If people are interested, I can email those out.
Okay. On the same vein, it's not listed on the agenda at all, but I would add that the Division of Marine Fisheries inshore trawl survey was canceled in the spring, and we've also now canceled the fall leg as well. We were working with the Science Center that operates the vessel under contract to the Division of Marine Fisheries. We were working with them on what the protocols would be, and the protocols were getting very, very cumbersome, and it was going to result in our staff having to stay on the boat for 6 consecutive days, be relegated to either the back deck or down below where the bunks and some of the scientific equipment are. We'd be excluded from the galley and the wheelhouse, and they would have done 3 6-day legs. And when we finally thought it through and realized that there's no other surveys being conducted in this year, and all of the extreme displacement and the uncomfortableness of those arrangements, we decided to just try to pick it up in the spring and not conduct the survey this year, which is unfortunate, but it's what's going on all up and down the East Coast in terms of fishery independent surveys. We're not the only ones who are going to have holes to fill, but we certainly hope that by next spring there's enough opportunity to get back on the water and resume those surveys. So Ray, those are the updates in COVID. I don't know if you want to take any questions or if we just move on to council and commission updates.
Well, let's see a raise of hands if there are questions, but just a comment. I mean, the clock is ticking here. Are there any questions from commission members?
Suki Sawyer.
Suki, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Dan and the staff again for the limited entry permit transfer policy. It was very important to some of our older members of MLA that they didn't want to lose, have the year used up because of this. So again, thanks to all Dan and all the staff. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Any other hands, Sharon?
I'm not seeing any other hands up, Ray.
Well, let's move along to the updates on the council, both councils and ASMFC. I presume Nicola's going to deal with that.
Yep. Do you want to go first, Melanie?
Nicola,
Sure.
the floor is yours.
Well, Melanie's first is NEFMC, so let's go with Melanie first.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah,
I'm
thanks.
sorry.
That's all right, Ray.
I apologize, Melanie.
No worries, Mr. Commissioner. Thank you. So I don't want to take too much time, but just try to give a brief update on activities of the New England Council from June to the pending September meeting. The September meeting does have a pretty weighty agenda comprised of several final actions, primarily groundfish with Amendment 23. This is the monitoring amendment. There is one public hearing still pending. Hopefully they're going to pull it off as an in-person, limited to 50 people. If not, it will be a webinar. Scallops also has a final action, Amendment 21. This is the Northern Gulf of Maine action, as well as looking at the possession limits for the limited access general category. That public hearing process is underway now through September 4th, and there's 2 remaining webinars, one on the 27th and September 2nd. Those are full webinars. There's no in-person option. Just to step back a moment with groundfish, there, aside from final action, the other topic that's looming large right now is a petition for secretarial rulemaking. That was a Conservation Law Foundation petition regarding Atlantic cod, making an argument that basically the council has not done its duty and that the secretary needs to step in to prevent overfishing and rebuild the stock. So that is right now under discussion by the council and its groundfish bodies. The committee just met and the council will take that up in September, basically to weigh in on the merits and potential measures. Herring also has a final action. That's the Framework 8 action, and that's going to be setting the 2021 to 2023 specifications, as well as measures to allow for incidental catch in the mackerel fishery. And then skates is the other big topic, and that is Amendment 5, which is discussing limited access. And that is one that's kind of gone back and forth, not only recently, but over the last couple of years. The committee did make some progress on goals and objectives, and we'll be meeting again before the September meeting to talk about potential measures to address those. I'd be happy to talk with members in more detail offline on any of this.
Thank you, Melanie. ASMSC and Mid-Atlantic Council actions, updates. Nicola?
Thanks, Ray. So with Menhaden, the long-awaited ecological reference points were adopted by the board. These are based on leaving enough menhaden in the water to support the predator needs. And the next step now is to use the reference points to set the coast-wide quota for the next, well, it's going to be done for the next 2 years, most likely. So the board will be looking at some projections of different quotas and how they relate to the risk of overfishing at the annual meeting in October. If I had to guess, I'd say it's more likely that the coast-wide quota will be status quo or a slight decrease as compared to increasing at this point, based on how the current quota stacks up against the new ecological reference point target for Menhaden. For bluefish, scup, fluke, and sea bass, the commission also met jointly with the Mid-Atlantic Council to set specifications for 2021. They were actually reviewing what had previously been set and making any changes. Notably, the council has a new risk policy that the SSC uses. And so it allowed some increases in places from what had previously been set for the quotas next year for those species that are at higher levels. You can have a slightly higher risk of overfishing than under the previous council risk policy. So for bluefish, the commercial quota will be the same, will be status quo for 2021. The recreational harvest limit will be going down 12%, however. For fluke, the commercial quota is going up 8%, as is the recreational harvest limit. For scup, the commercial quota is going down 8%, and the recreational harvest limit down 7%. For sea bass, the commercial quota is going, and the recreational harvest limit are going up 9%. So I would just caution that what those recreational harvest limits for 2021 actually mean in relation to the recreational measures is very uncertain at this time. As you know, we compare the harvest in the year prior to the harvest limit for the next year to determine what those measures need to be. And there's going to be some difficulty with having, the 2020 MRIP data, given the delays and lack of intercept data at some point during the year for 2021. So I don't think anyone has a good handle yet on what that means for setting of the recreational measures in 2021. For sea bass, the board did approve a black sea bass commercial reallocation addendum for public hearing. So that'll be coming to a webinar near you for public hearings this fall. It's expected that those will not be held in person. Final action on that reallocation addendum for sea bass may be delayed because at the same time we are working on a commercial recreational reallocation amendment for fluke, scup, and sea bass that responds to the new MRIP data and what they have meant for the stock assessments for those species, and then including those data into the allocations as well. So it might be, there was discussion that, the sea bass reallocation addendum may be delayed in order to have final action at the same time as the commercial recreational reallocation amendment, as the two are obviously very closely related to one another. There's also a bluefish amendment that is looking at the rebuilding and of the stock and the commercial recreational allocation. A draft range of alternatives was approved for that. So we'll be looking at the actual document in December, and both of those amendments for fluke, scup, and sea bass and bluefish will be going to public, are anticipated to go to public hearing early next year. Notably, for both the bluefish amendment and the commercial recreational allocation amendment for fluke, scup, and sea bass, one issue that was pulled back from those was for hire sector separation in the recreational fishery. It was felt that that issue really needs to be looked at comprehensively across those species, and in concert with other what are being called recreational reform initiatives. I know that when I've spoken to most people supporting for hire sector separation, there's been an expectation that MRIP would not be the tool with which the for hire sector would get its allocation or be accountable to its allocation, that this would be VTRs or something else from the for hire fleet, which does not exist uniformly along the coast. So this recreational reform initiative is something that will likely become an actual action within the council and commission following after the annual meeting. So that'll be looking at a host of tools to try to improve the fisheries management, and is anticipated to still include for hire sector separation and possibly different accounting and accountability measures within the fishery. I think that covers my species.
And as Melanie stated, commission members can talk to you offline.
Certainly.
About any of these actions, Nicola?
Of course. Of course.
Thank you very much. Okay, moving along, commission member comments. We'll start with Khalil. Commission member comments. We'll start with Khalil.
Yes, I had to unmute myself. As the commission members know, and the DMF knows, that my brother passed away in March 4th of this year, and I'd like to thank. I received a notice from my brother's church because my brother didn't want flowers, so he wanted donations made to the Grace Episcopal Church, where he was an active member. And I just wanted, and I did receive notice from the church that Jared Silva had made a donation, and the donation was also from the Division of Marine Fishery. So I'd like to do just a blanket thank you to those members of the fisheries, marine fisheries, that donated to his church. I was really touched and honored that you did that. And my brother would have been very happy that, to know that his church, which was a valuable part of his life, was being honored by the Division of Marine Fisheries. So thank you so much for that contribution.
Thank you, Khalil. Suki?
All set, Ray.
Bill Doyle, are you back? Kim Brady?
Yes, hi. Just like to thank everybody, and there were many, many people listening here and maybe even not listening here that were involved in the process of expediting the CARES money out to the for-hire fleet, the head boats. All the feedback I've had has been positive. I certainly appreciate it myself. I like the way everybody sort of jumped in and got it done quick, and hopefully the same thing is going to happen with the charter boat fleet. Just a rough season. Everybody's losing money in the for-hire sector, and we're just trying to get through it. So, but thank you so much for everybody that participated in that process. Thanks.
Thank you, Tim. Mike Piernock.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, there's a lot of things to thank DMF for There's been a lot going on as we've gone through this meeting here today. The CARES Act, the additional measures or change in measures for the party boat fleet. I wanted to thank Nicola, as well as Dan and Ray and everybody that helped break new ground and lead the way with what was done with the Black Sea Bass Atlantic States Marine Fishery Commission. There have been individuals that have reached out to me as you indicated, how you very technically put things together and scientifically and technically presented it and got it approved, which, Ray, you've said it, and I agree with you more than once. We have a heck of a team there with Dan and everybody that leads the way, and the professionalism we have in comparison to the other states is to be commended. So thank you. Then let's not forget Melanie for what took place with the cod situation and expanding the for-hire cod season this upcoming month. Well, excuse me, September and October. So thank you once again for that. And I just want you to know that the for-hire fleet, recreational anglers and so on that are out there appreciate everything you've done to make this happen. We've been requesting it for years, and we're starting to see some relief with that. So thank you.
Yeah, and I'll ad lib. I enjoy Melanie's interpretation of what's going on with the New England Council. So hopefully, and I work more closely with Nicola because of the Mid-Atlantic and ASMFC, but I like Melanie's interpretation of the council and what's going on, and I would like to hear more from Melanie in the future. I'm sure we can find room for Melanie on our agenda. Melanie, don't hate me for saying that. And I would like to thank commission members for attending today. I'd like to thank Ron Amidon, Commissioner Ron Amidon, the Division of Fish and Game, for the stellar work he's been doing all summer with the Agricultural Department, with DMF. And once again, my hat is off to the entire DMF staff. We have a lot of work ahead of us, and it just keeps coming, and issues get more and more difficult. So thank you all. Now I'm going to go to public comment. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to comment?
If you do raise your hand, I'll give speaking privileges. I'm not seeing anyone with their hands raised. So I believe we can move to adjourn the meeting, Ray.
Need a motion to adjourn, gentlemen.
Blair here, move to adjourn.
Thank you all.
Need a second.
Second, Tim Brady.
And all those in favor.
Aye.
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 Unanimous. Thank you all for your attendance today.
Thank you,
Well
Commission.
appreciated.
Thank you, Ray.
Thanks, Ray.
Yep.